Good morning, everyone. My name is Gesche Schifferdecker. I'm the comms manager for the Superb project, and I'm a comms manager at EFI. And this is, of course, a very exciting moment for us because we are presenting you with the synthesis of a 4-year project that has been intense and really big, and it's a special moment for us. You will hear from all our work basically, and just some housekeeping rules for the webinar. The webinar is being recorded. That means that you will also be able to watch the webinar again afterwards or share it with your colleagues. For questions to the presenters, please use the dedicated Q&A box. You will find it on the bottom of your Zoom. After each presentation, we will be able to read and answer. That the 2 to 4 is optimistic. We will try 2 to 4, depending on the question. It might just be 1 or 2 questions, and you can then also get back to the panelists afterwards in case you have follow-up questions. We can enable automatic captions. This is done if you click on show captions in your Zoom. We tried to enable automatic translation, but we didn't manage. Apologies for that. However, we will make sure that this is added as a function on the YouTube later. And now I'm very happy to introduce the Superb coordinator, Elisabeth Schatzdorfer. She's also a principal scientist at EFI, and she will introduce us to the Superb concept and the definition of restoration. And it will be a nice introduction to the overall work that we did in 4 years. Elisabeth, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And I'm trying to share my slides. I hope you can see them now. I think it should be working. So thank you very much for the nice introduction, Gesche, and thank you everyone for joining this synthesis webinar. And the title of my presentation, of my very short intro presentation, is Superb Concept and Definition of Restoration, where I'll give you a brief insight into our main thinking, which accompanied us for these last 4 years. So the Superb vision was to restore forest landscapes across Europe by, on the one hand, creating an enabling environment for large-scale transformative restoration, and on the other hand, by demonstrating forward-looking forest restoration and biodiversity-friendly management approaches at multiple scales. This we have now consistently worked on in the last 4 years in our consortium of 36 partner organizations from 16 EU countries and non-EU countries. The project was funded by the European Commission, and we also received substantial support from 90 associate partners and also many other local, national, EU, and international restoration stakeholders. So how to achieve this vision, how to achieve transformative change? Our concept was based on 6 pillars. First one, to test and demonstrate successful restoration approaches in 12 large-scale demonstration areas, which faced different restoration, pressures, degradation causes, and restoration challenges. Second, to improve societal support for restoration and the benefits from restoration by fully considering the societal demands and the expectations, and also co-designing suitable and favorable restoration plans. Third, to deliver evidence-based, practical and scientific knowledge on successfully managing, monitoring, governing and financing restoration. Fourth pillar was to deliver an online multi-language forest restoration gateway as the central knowledge platform for restoration stakeholders. Fifth, to launch an interactive online marketplace for high-quality restoration projects as a matchmaking platform for market agents. And last but not least, to create a large and powerful multi-stakeholder network and movement for transformative restoration through very targeted, carefully planned and professionally led engagement process. So now let's come to the question why we do forest restoration. One can look at it from a number of different angles, certainly. We may want to restore or improve biodiversity through, for example, increasing structural, functional, and landscape diversity, or to restore specific species or habitats. We may also want to restore or strengthen the provision of different products and services like wood and biomass production, non-timber products, social and cultural values, protective and regulatory functions like soil health, water quality, erosion control, and more, and definitely also including climate change mitigation. That is often a very important driver also for restoration. We may also want to restore resilience through diversity, complexity, and adaptive capacity. Or we may focus on restoration after a certain degradation event, after natural or human disturbances, or we may be driven by the idea to primarily let nature run its course and have natural processes prevail. It's, however, important to note that not all objectives can really be fulfilled at the maximum extent at once. And it would be wrong to believe that if we focus primarily on biodiversity, the rest will follow automatically. So there are always trade-offs to be considered. And internationally, the concept of the restoration continuum has received quite some recognition. The concept shows steps or levels of restoration and ranges from reducing societal impacts over improving ecosystem management to repairing ecosystem functioning, and on the right-hand side of the image, to an emphasis on native recovery or partial or full restoration of native ecosystems, which is shown as the top or the most advanced stage. In the European forest context, however, and under global change, there are quite a number of question marks, we have to say. For example, science clearly shows and projects the severe impacts that climate change or invasive pests and pathogens have, which will inevitably lead to, in many places, to modified species assemblages or ecological interactions. Also, we know that we live in a densely populated Europe, where the natural forest cover has been reduced from about 80% to 35% over thousands of years, and where we still face a strong competition among different land users and among different ecosystem products and services. Therefore, in Superb, we have never really put forward this concept and have given much more focus on the process of restoration rather than a strict definition and a prescribed endpoint for restoration. The EUIndicate uses a quite useful scheme of the restoration process, which shows 5 components: the assessment, the planning and design, the implementation, the ongoing management, and the monitoring and evaluation, and some cross-cutting subcomponents which should be integrated into every phase of the cycle. Similar to Superb, the broad engagement and the adaptive management are put at the center, because restoration under global change must be approached as an adaptive process. What we want to restore are sustainable and resilient social ecological systems, which occur at the overlap between the environmental and the social sphere, where the demand of the society is sustained by the capacity of the ecosystem to provide the desired ecosystem services. That area of overlap is, however, dynamic due to environmental changes and societal changes. And to find this space and to stay within this overlap area is hugely challenging. Therefore, we have recommended in last year's superb policy brief aimed at the nature restoration regulation, and these are certainly not the only recommendations we have come up with in superb, to use a strategic plan of passive and active restoration, to consider assisted migration as an important risk mitigation measure, to redefine European native tree species according to their potential future ranges. So here I'm also referring to a definition used in the nature restoration regulation, and to set realistic restoration targets that can be achieved. And what is realistic depends on the one hand on the changing environmental conditions, and on the other hand on the diverse socioeconomic factors. And yeah, with that, I already give back the floor to Gesche. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. There is no immediate question in the chat. So what I would suggest is, and there are some clapping hands, so that's great to hear. What I suggest is, in case there's any question that is coming up after Elisabeth's presentation now, you can put it in the chat. She might be able to answer it directly in the chat, or we might be able to pick it up later on. In the beginning, to have a bit of a buffer. This is actually great for a webinar because it means we have more time for the usually accumulating questions afterwards. So I would then suggest that I introduce our next speakers, and just to have a bit of an overview of the time, we will have 4 more presentations now in the morning on the history of forest restoration in Europe, then restoration approaches and methods. Then we will talk about large-scale and long-term effects of restoration in terms of carbon, wood provision, and biodiversity. And then we will talk about the societal perceptions of forest restoration and about stakeholder engagement. So, and then we will have a break, and then we will talk about biodiversity credits and many more topics. So it's going to be an exciting and intense morning. And I forgot this overview actually because I had some technical issues before the webinar started. But now everything looks fine, and I am happy to introduce our next 2 speakers, which is Maitane Erdozain from the Forest Science and Technology Center of Catalonia, and Iciar Alberdi from the National Institute, the Spanish National Institute for Agriculture and Food Research and Technology. And the 2 of them will actually speak about the history of forest restoration in Europe and what we can learn from the past. So, ladies, you have the floor. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gesche. And good morning, everyone. We are, as Gesche just mentioned, to introduce briefly all our work to compile the learnings from the history of the forest restoration in Europe. Next. For this, we have been collecting the practical knowledge of the past restoration projects and activities through different methods. Just to mention them, we have done first a literature review. We have identified the different projects in the past. We also get the stakeholders' knowledge through a practice database on that. And additionally, and what we will be working in today, we have compiled the national level experts assessments through different countries. Also, to collect this know-how of the different countries, we have done different workshops, and also we have worked with specific case studies. So today, Maitane will present you the more extensive what we have learned from the national assessments. But first, I would like to very briefly introduce you that with this literature review, we have really compiled all the categories and the background for this, for all the methodologies. And we have really identify the grid variability in the different indicators in Europe for forest restoration. Also, I would very briefly introduce some achievements or some lessons learned from the work we have done from projects. And we have worked with this questionnaire, but also with the different projects that have lots of information in the past. And we have seen how dependent or how significant it is if we see the restoration objective and the different geographical zones, the need of the monitoring phase and the low percentage that is normally allocated in the planning phase. Also, the difference between these European regions with the engagement of the stakeholders and the uncertainty of the feasibility of some indicators. After this, I would like to give the floor to Maitane that will introduce you this relevant part.
Okay, thank you, Iciar, and good morning, everyone. So yeah, with the national expert assessments, our goal was to describe the historical evolution of forest restoration in Europe and why. Why is this important? Well, to paraphrase the philosopher George Santayana, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat the same mistakes in the present and in the future. And you all know that we are currently living an exciting moment for forest restoration with ambitious targets and growing interest worldwide. And this may give us the wrong impression that maybe restoration is something new, but the truth is that it has a long and rich history. For example, in China, more than 2,000 years ago, they created a forest service to restore degraded land. This means that we have a really good opportunity to learn from past mistakes and successes. So in Superb, in order to do this for Europe, we collaborated with 32 national experts from 18 countries who developed detailed national narratives on the history of forest restoration in their country based on a pre-designed template that we provided them with. And then we received all these narratives and we conducted a systematic comparative thematic analysis looking for common patterns and key insights. So based on all this information that we collected, we divided it into 3 different time periods, and we described each period. And all the learnings, we condensed them into 10 key lessons that you can see in this infographic and that we recently published in an article in Current Forestry Reports. And we are also about to publish a second paper on the role of social policy and economic forces in shaping the evolution of forest restoration in Europe. And I wish I had more time to go through all these findings with you, but since time is short, I have decided to focus on 5 key ideas that have been especially influential and that I think are also relevant nowadays. So let's begin with armed societal crises or wars, which have influenced forest restoration in an ambivalent way. On the one hand, wars have caused direct destruction through shelling, also indirect destruction by increasing timber demand to support military action and also to reconstruct the countries after war. They have also acted as barriers by halting previous restoration efforts, since priorities and funding can change abruptly in times of geopolitical crisis. But on the other hand, these crises sometimes have also triggered large-scale afforestation and reforestation campaigns driven by the need to ensure domestic timber supply. But it is important to note that these efforts mostly focus on timber provision at the expense of other ecosystem services. So they heavily tended to rely on fast-growing even-age conifer plantations, and this has consequences in forest structure and composition that we are still seeing these days. Considering the tumultuous current geopolitical situation, therefore, it is important to keep in mind that sidelining environmental goals in times of geopolitical crisis has enduring long-term consequences. Changes in forest ownership and governance have also been very relevant for forest restoration over time. During times or periods in which forest management was centralized and ownership nationalized, large-scale goals were achieved or tended to be achieved more efficiently, but of course at the expense of stakeholder engagement, whereas in periods that were characterized by the fragmentation of ownership and governance, usually there were like more uncoordinated efforts and more conflicts. So the lack of available public land has been a long-standing issue over the past 150 years for restoration. So governments have tried different mechanisms to deal with this. They all have their limitations, but some of the most successful ones have been tax incentives, land purchases and consolidation, and payments for ecosystem services based on long-term contracts. So the policy recommendation that arises from these past lessons is that we should try to foster hybrid governance models that combine centralized coordination, planning, and funding with the regional local autonomy needed to address diverse socio-ecological contexts. Over time, also, we have had a wide range of policies from different sectors influencing forest restoration. We have tried to gather the most influential ones in this timeline that you can see or guess in this figure. And from this compilation, we have identified that the strongest and most persistent obstacle for restoration has been the lack of coherence between policies from different sectors, such as agriculture, energy conservation, and so on. In contrast, the policies that have led or enabled more successful efforts have been robust national laws or frameworks that balance socioeconomic benefits and ecological protection. Also, the creation of administrative units and institutions that are specialized in forest restoration, and also forward-looking environmental international policies. Based on this, we believe that in order to achieve the large-scale ambitions and targets that we have to, it is important to strengthen national regulatory frameworks that include clear obligations and restrictions for forest management, and to complement this with the creation of multidisciplinary institutions that specialize in forest restoration. A constant obstacle over the past 150 years has been the lack of stable funding for restoration. Funding mechanisms that with heavy bureaucracy have been clear deterrents, as they have discouraged landowners from participating, and also conflicting intersectoral subsidy systems have been a clear barrier. But we also have examples of mechanisms that have led to more successful outcomes. For example, state funding mechanisms derived from a tax on forest products have been quite successful, especially in the 20th century. EU funds also have been key, especially in terms of diversifying restoration goals, and tax benefits as well have been successful in encouraging the participation of private forest owners in restoration. Based on this, we believe that it is key to secure, of course, sufficient long-term financing, both from public and private sources, by establishing payment mechanisms for ecosystem services beyond timber and carbon that combine clear incentives with strong public oversight and regulation. And finally, similar to the conflicts at the policy level, conflicts at the social level among stakeholders have created tensions that have negatively influenced forest restoration over time. The main conflict historically has been that between forest and agricultural land uses, but since the 90s, conflicts have been intensifying due to the new demands that are being placed on forests. Rural abandonment sometimes eases some of these conflicts by reducing competition and allowing for natural regeneration, but it can also lead to degradation, especially in Mediterranean contexts where it is related to increased wildfire risk. Finally, persuasive instruments such as training services or public awareness and education campaigns have played an important role over time in shifting societal values and building broad support for forest restoration. In this sense, and in order to reduce conflicts among stakeholders, we believe that we should try to promote a holistic, multi-sectoral landscape approach when planning for restoration so that we minimize trade-offs between interests, and also trying to foster public participation and private engagement by aligning restoration with rural development, for example, through support for a sustainable bioeconomy. And finally, in all these narratives, we have seen a pattern repeated in many countries, and this is that usually the solutions to a problem are taken with a short-term thinking, and therefore these solutions tend to become problems in the future, or the causes of degradation that then we have to address in the future. We have many examples in the narratives of this, and that is why we wanted to end by reminding that long-term thinking that is aware of the interconnectedness of the system is key for long-term success in forest restoration. So yeah, I wanted to thank, of course, all the national experts who provided these valuable insights and made this work possible. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maitane and Iciar, for this brilliant presentation. And yeah, there are a lot of clapping hands. Yeah, also for sharing the lessons learned. And eventually we will also try to make some of those narratives public so that you can also read it and learn from them. And definitely recommending also to read the paper that Maitane and other colleagues wrote about the kind of summary and synthesis and the learnings from those narratives. Very insightful. Now we have a question also from the audience. Just as a kind reminder, it would be great if when you ask a question that you also write down your name and institution, because then of course we can also provide you with the visibility when reading out the questions. This question comes from a person who did not add the institution or name, but it's a very interesting question. If I understand correctly, you mentioned that a national/centralized approach is better to address high-scale restoration projects or large-scale restoration projects. Do we then also see in countries with a high national ownership, so where there's a lot of forest owned by the state, that forest areas are more resilient and robust ecosystems?
That's a very good question. Well, I think it's not the only factor. So at least when we mention this about the historical situations in which a nationalized context was linked to more efficient efforts, it was also because there was a very clear goal that was planned for the entire country and coordinated, and the achievement of this goal was then quite efficiently achieved. In this question, I guess we should also, I don't know if that is the case, because it doesn't necessarily mean that if there is a great share of public forest, but then if there is not this centralized management with a clear objective of making these forests more resilient, then this will not be the case. If the goal that this centralized and nationalized management decides is to produce more timber, then we will not see more resilient forests. So it depends, like the mechanism allows for achieving the goals efficiently, but of course it depends on the goal that it is pursued, if that makes sense. I don't know, Iciar, if you want to
Yes,
add.
that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, also what plays into this is that obviously also the investments, the long-term investments, you emphasize that strongly, that they play an important role. So if there's and that might be easier if it's state-owned, because it's easier to kind of gather the investments. But if you don't invest in the long-term resilience of the ecosystem, also financially and with specific measures, then of course you will not have the outcomes in the long run. So
Yeah.
I think that was clear from your presentation. I cannot see any further questions in the Q&A. Please, participants, feel free to add further questions there. But then I would like to thank the two of you for the presentation. And I would like to introduce our next speaker, Jürgen Bauhus from the University of Freiburg, who will tell us about what we learned in terms of restoration approaches and methods, and how we can take that further into the future. Jürgen, you have the floor.
Good. Thank you very much, Gesche, also for the introduction. I hope you can see the full screen. Nodding, that's always helpful.
Yes, we can.
So the goal for the next 12 minutes, that's the order, is to present you with sort of a few highlights of our work package 6, where we looked at the evidence of restoration approaches, regeneration methods, but also the monitoring of biodiversity and ecosystem services in restoration sequences, and also the projection of what the future development of these restored systems is like. That we cannot cover all in the short period of time, and what we present here today are selected results. What I present to you, so the work also of Klaus Kremer from the University of Freiburg, where I'm also from, and Albert Schischoi from the Austrian Forest Research Center in Vienna. So how do we move on here? So the overall objective of the work that we did in SUPERB was to provide an evidence base and best practice guidelines for implementation and monitoring of forest restoration. And the work that we were doing here was meant to be particularly relevant for the demo regions, but also beyond the demo regions across Europe. And you see the spread of these demo regions here in this image. What we did was to carry out systematic reviews to fill particular knowledge gaps on the effects of restoration measures, and how we identify those, I will say in a moment. We aimed to identify particularly suitable tree species and provenances across Europe to provide advice to restoration practitioners, forest owners, on how to shape the forest of the future. The monitoring of biodiversity and ecosystem services along restoration chronosequences to assess the effectiveness in the medium to long term was also a large part of our project. There, a lot of work is still ongoing in terms of analyzing the results. And last but not least, and you'll hear more of that from Gert-Jan Nabuurs, on the projection of restoration outcomes in space and time. We will focus today here on the first two aspects of the work that we did in this part of SUPERB. What was very important for us was that we tailored our research to the research needs of restoration practitioners. And that's why the basis at the start of our work was to liaise with the stakeholders from the demo regions to really identify the knowledge gaps that they perceived for their work. And from that, we basically derived, a number of research questions that were particularly important, but equally, suitable to systematic reviews. And the questions that we selected and which we will report upon here were related to the planting patterns and techniques for reforestation, afforestation. There are a number of questions, and you see an image here of replanting after dieback of spruce forests that occurred across Europe in the last decade. They revolved around diversifying structure and composition of secondary forests, so how to enrich existing forests structurally and compositionally to enhance biodiversity, and third, on increasing landscape connectivity. Why systematic reviews? We focused on systematic reviews because they are the strongest evidence that we have on certain practices. What you see here is a sort of pyramid of confidence levels that are associated with different sorts of studies. And the lowest level of confidence is usually associated with expert opinions or inferences. Then this increases with proper experiments and replicated experiments. But the synthesis of multiple experiments, that provides the best evidence. And we know this quite well from medicine, because when we go to a doctor, we don't want to have a single expert opinion, but we want to know how a certain treatment is actually effective across the population. And in many regards, we don't have that yet in restoration. I'll give you a few examples of this work. One of it was on the effects of nurse structures on the performance of restoration plantings. So nurse structures here, structures that actually facilitate the establishment success of seedlings. And we usually start here with identifying as many studies as possible that report on this question. And as you can see on this map here, in our search for evidence, we also went beyond Europe because much can be learned also from similar ecosystems, similar cases in other parts of the world. And in this case, for example, we identified 82 studies, but we started off by probably finding, close to 1,000, but many of these didn't really match the criteria that we were looking for. And in this particular systematic review, we compare the effectiveness of artificial nurse structures, as you can see here on the left with these growth tubes, and natural nurse structures, which could be nurse tree species or shrubs, as you see here, or also dead wood, if it protects the seedlings. And the outcomes of these systematic review are often depicted in this kind of diagram, where we have these diamond shapes, and the width of this diamond is indicative of the variation. If the diamond is black, as you see here, it means it's a significant effect, and if it is empty, it is a non-significant effect. And we see here for a general model, in this case, a significant positive effect of nurse structures on the performance of restoration plantings. And then you can see here for additional variables, which of these are having a significant effect on the performance of these seedlings and saplings. So what we see is that nurse structures are obviously beneficial, and we can look at particular response variables such as the survival of seedlings, height growth, diameter growth, or water potential. And we see that these nerve structures are particularly important for the survival of trees. Perhaps less so for the height growth, because some of these nerve structures also induce competition. But what this review really nicely shows, and I think this is very important for practitioners, if you do something, if you use growth tubes or other vegetations to protect seedlings, and we see this is particularly effective for drought, for browsing or competition, then you greatly enhance the chance of survival of the seedlings, and thus, of course, reduce costs for re-establishment, etc. So I think a very helpful study for our restoration practitioners. The next example that I want to give you is that from the effects of mixed versus pure species plantings on biodiversity. We focused here on experiments mostly that allowed us to compare mixtures with monocultures on the same site and planted under otherwise similar conditions. And as you can see here, we again collected examples from around the world to address that question. And the response variables we looked at here was mostly the diversity of other taxonomic groups that can then be found in these plantations. So the diversity of ground vegetation, of arthropods, of birds, etc. So here, as you can see, we identified 71 studies, see that we covered different biomes, different age classes quite well, from less than 5 years to older than 20 years, gradients in tree species richness from 2 to more than 5, and reasonable balance between conifers and broadleaves. You're familiar now with the kind of results depiction here. And again, we see that mixed species have an overall influence on the diversity of other taxonomic species. That is not so shocking, as a result. That's what we would expect. But I think what is important is to look at some of the drivers and factors that influence this positive response. So to our surprise, we found that this effect is actually strongest in youngest mixed species plantings. It is more significant when we have more tree species rich plantations, and when the combination or the mixture or the proportion of mixed species is more even than uneven. So when the admixed species are more evenly added. So again, I think these are results that can be readily used and implemented by restoration practitioners. And it shows that if we really want to promote biodiversity through restoration plantings, then mixing tree species, and ideally more than 2, is a very suitable and effective approach. So to summarize, these general findings: survival and height growth of seedlings benefits from the presence of nerve structures, in particular in dry and hot regions. So well-ventilated shelters, so not closed growth tubes, should be preferred, while sort of nurse plants that compete with target species should be avoided because they present too much competition for water. Mixed species plantations promote higher biodiversity than pure plantations, and the positive effects increase with tree species richness. Now moving on to the second major part of the work that our colleagues from the BFW in Vienna carried out, namely to identify suitable tree species and provenances across Europe. And as part of this project, they developed a web-based tool to identify best tree species, mixtures, and seed sources across Europe to give very sort of hands-on advice to those that are responsible for re-establishing, restoring forests. And here you have a link to this tool. And the tool is designed to support these practitioners with the selection guidance and also to provide evidence for policy making in the context of climate change, so that people can see also to what extent the suitability of tree species, also native versus non-native species, may actually change. And through that, to facilitate assisted migration. So what does this tool do, or what information can be gained? On the one side, it helps with species selection. You see here a map of Europe, and the dot there provides a concrete example from a 1 kilometer grid cell that you can zoom in and basically query the suitability of different tree species. Here, Quercus robur. And the suitability is depicted across 3 different time periods until 2025, until 2050, and then 2085. And we see for this, in this particular case, that the suitability of Quercus robur declines only slightly, and this mostly in the more extreme climate change scenario, the RPC 8.5 when compared to 4.5. In addition to the general suitability, you can query the productivity, which is depicted here in terms of height growth, and you see that these curves are rather similar. In addition, you can not only look at the species itself, but by a community of species that are associated with your target species. And it basically shows how suitable certain mixtures are at this particular site. And further, it helps with provenance selection. So for the particular location for which you start your query, the tool recommends most suitable seed sources for a given species and location. And it's actually linked to this Formatis database that allows users then to hone in, as you can see here, to access registration number for seed stands and sourcing material. And lastly, the tool, it also enables you to download basically a comprehensive report which summarizes and visualizes the most important information. So very practical, science-based selection tool. And this is, of course, a tool that is very important for this, what Elisabeth pointed out in her introductory talk, this what we call forward-looking approach to restoration, which we also call pre-storation, which requires some form of assisted migration, be that assisted gene flow or assisted range expansion of species, or assisted introduction of species to new sites. You will find a lot more information about what we did in Work Package 6 on the website, also the publication where this is documented, and of course a lot of the information on additional restoration practices and approaches can be found in the gateway of Superb, about which you will hear more during our webinar. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jürgen, for this introduction to, I think, the outputs of your work that is really relevant for the participants, which are mostly practitioners and forest owners, many of them at least. And there is a question from the audience. Actually, one question and one comment, and the question is coming from Isaac Levovrov from PFC International, and he's asking whether it is possible to demonstrate that an ecosystem is undergoing restoration using general indicators at the European scale, and if so, how can this be achieved, and what temporal and spatial scale is required?
It's a very comprehensive question.
Yes, I was also worried, but you have a couple of minutes.
So we have, in fact, in Superb, carried out quite sophisticated monitoring approaches, where we not only looked at indirect indicators of biodiversity, as you find mostly in the indicators that are prescribed under the nature restoration legislation, like biomass or number of habitat trees or deadwood, etc. But we really looked at groups of species, insects, also DNA, etc. And of course, this can be done, but that would not be the approach that, say, individual projects would do. When we have been also somewhat critical about the approaches being put forward under the natural restoration legislation, because it does not allow to study the effectiveness of particular restoration approaches. It's only suited to give an assessment of where the whole forest area really develops to. To study the effectiveness of restoration approaches, you need to have a counterfactual, basically areas that are not being restored or still in a degraded state. And you would need to have sites where, that have started off in a similar state, of degradation after different periods of time, and to think about which indicators are more suitable to actually show this. And I think in future, we will have very effective ways of monitoring it through remote sensing, through sampling environmental DNA, which we have done, to capture large shares of biodiversity. We also use soundscapes to capture bird diversity, but you need to do this also at many sites to capture the environmental variation. So everything but trivial. No, as I said, complex question and probably not an easy answer, sorry. But it's a topic that really deserves also more discussion, how we best and most effectively monitor biodiversity and ecosystem services provision following restoration.
Yes, and this would probably also require more long-term monitoring to really see the effects longer than just 4 years. Thank you, Jürgen. That was, I think, a perfect answer. I have a comment from Michel Dostert from Luxembourg, which is related to the app. He just tried it, and the comment is rather critical. So maybe it is not possible to respond to this in detail, but maybe you can tell briefly how the app was developed in the and on what type of modeling approaches it was based on. So just to explain maybe why, because he was not happy with the result for a specific area under a certain scenario.
Yeah, I think it would be really best if he talked directly to the developers, to Dev Chakraborty, Albert Choi, and Silvio Schüler from BFW, because I have not been involved myself in the development of the app, which was part of the work package that I led. But there are people who are better suited to answer that question.
Yes, I agree. And it would actually be helpful because I know that they are also working on improving the app. And I'm pretty sure that they would be grateful for the feedback. So maybe my colleague could add the contact information, or the contact information should also be available through the app. And then please give this feedback directly. I am sure the colleagues from Austria are very happy to pick that up.
I can help to clarify that particular issue because he refers to dry and sandy sites. So the app at the moment considers climate only. It will be a next development stage to also consider the soil properties. So that's probably what causes the issue at this very moment. But as we speak, they are already thinking about, definitely integrating other site factors as well into this whole complex system. But at the moment, it's climate driven.
Yeah,
thank you very much, Elisabeth,
Elisabeth,
for the clarification.
I didn't see that detail of the question, so.
Wonderful. Perfect team here. Great. Thank you very much, Jürgen. Then I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Gert-Jan Nabuurs from Wageningen University Research, who will talk to us about the large-scale, long-term effects of restoration on the carbon, the wood provision, and the biodiversity. Gert-Jan, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gesche. I'll share my screen now. I hope you can see it now in full screen.
Now we can see the different slides.
Yeah.
Yes, now it's full screen. Perfect.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Very happy to be here, and I'll indeed try to shed some light on the large scale and long-term effects of restoration. Well, Isaac Lievevrouw in the previous question also indicated a bit that how do we prove that things are going in the right direction, or whatever you call right direction, or in a certain direction. So yeah, it's a purpose 4 years project with all the aspects that Elisabeth outlined. And then of course you only see or hardly see the beginning of changes. And so as part of Superb, what Jürgen also said, there was also building in these management changes into a large-scale forest resource projection model to try and foresee alternatives of restoration and what the long-term impacts are in terms of resources, in terms of carbon, in terms of wood availability, biodiversity indicators, and the costs as well. So very briefly, I won't go a lot into details of the models and such, but in any case, over the last 10-12 years, we have built up an absolutely unique forest resource database, thanks to 20 national forest inventories. That is an enormous database now with 400,000 of the national forest inventory plots. I assume you all know how national forest inventories work, with small plots that are a sample design over the country. In the database are now 9.9 million trees, so the individual tree measurements we have very often remeasured. And if you know the remeasurements, then you know what is going on in the resources. And then you can fit functions that you need in order to project it in a very simple way. So we fit the growth, the ingrowth, mortality, the management you can derive from these repeated cycles, and that way we can project it into the future. Well, there's also other modules, but I won't go a lot into that. So all the green dots that you see on the left, they are these NFI plots. We know the diameter distribution. You see here the diameters are on the x-axis and the number of trees in one plot. So this is a multi-layer stand with an overstory of Scots pine and some spruce coming in underneath. And that we can then apply to all over Europe, basically projecting that in a high mode of detail. Of course, we can then also build in management changes, restoration changes, and that's what was done in Superb for the 12 demo areas. So I can only show you one, and then I'll show you one full country run as well. The example that I'll show you what this means, the long-term resource projection, is for the Vysočina demo region, where the Norway spruce was affected by bark beetle and where restoration measures are being carried out by the local demo people. So there it very much aimed at, it's a rather drastic type of, driven by the disturbances, drastic type of changes and restoration, establish new and mixed forests in multiple species, also using more natural regeneration of pioneer species as well. And that's what we then project into the future. This is a small part of the Vysočina region. The dark green is forest or was forest, and then the light green, light blue, those are the areas that were affected by bark beetle in the different years. Move this a bit this side. And then the small yellow dots are the NFI plots. So those plots that were affected by bark beetle, that's where we made the quick changes in the management and the regeneration of the different species. So then we forward simulate this to 2100. And this is what it then means in terms of, for example, if we assume an intense bark beetle, that there will be, well, under the climate scenario, it's projected there will be more hot and dry summers. So the intense bark beetle scenario continues. That means an oversupply of spruce up to 2030, 2035. In which you make the restoration in a quite drastic way, and then an undersupply in the future, which is associated to that. And then, well, with, in the end, also through your regeneration with deciduous species, that also has an impact on your gross annual increment, the green line. Of course, for the industry, these sort of insights in the wood balance they are very important. And that also means your forest resource changes in the long term. This is the 2025 in the top left. Diameter distribution by main species. The dark green is spruce. Under a business as usual, if we assume almost no bark beetle, that will continue to grow, and there may be a buildup of spruce stock and spruce diameters, but the scenario that I showed is more like the dark on the bottom left, where you really deplete, well, because of the bark beetle, you are depleting your resources, so you have far less volume growing stock developing over time. But in the bottom left, you do see that a multiple set of species is coming up in the smaller diameters, but that really takes time. So you do take your resources through a phase where you actually lose carbon, you lose structural diversity, and only gradually you start building up that resource again, but with a mixed variety of species. So these are all, of course, indicators that are also mentioned in the nature restoration law: structure, stocking, carbon, etc. Mixtures of species. So you gain in some indicators, but you certainly also lose in other indicators. Another example, so we can also run a full country. And for this, we because it's rather timely, we took the example of Ireland. You know, in January there was a heavy storm, Eowyn, in the west of Ireland that blew down about 2 years of Sitka spruce harvesting, and that, so we employed a forest restoration scenario in the west of Ireland. In the middle map you see each of the NFI plots in Ireland, the growing stock as it was in 2020. So we assume that, and that is, well, we know where the storm blew down a lot of the resources in the west. And then in the bottom graphs, under this restoration scenario, you see how this, if we employ then a restoration scenario, assuming that many owners will not want to go back to Sitka, well, whether that is a right assumption or not, that is of course up for further discussion. But assuming that many owners will not want to go on with Sitka, you have an oversupply in the light green here of Sitka in the short term up to the coming 10-20 years, and then later on a far lesser supply. But in the growing stock there in the bottom right, you also see that the average growing stock of the whole of the Irish forest, because of this change in management, because of the restoration, you also take the growing stock through some losses. The lines are going down there, and then gradually the new species start coming up. But that also means that on these indicators of the nature restoration law, you're not always gaining, but you also have to take into account some losses. We can then also connect this to the industry. We have a very extensive mills and pulp mills, sawmills database for all over Europe, and then can also assess what this means in terms of costs. If you change this resource in Ireland, we're building up together with Max Schulte a full road, rail, and water transport mode coupled to the resource model. And then on the right, under the restoration scenario, where we assume that in the model projector will be less spruce in the future, your transport distances start to increase, your mode of transport also start to change, and your average transport cost from the full harvesting cost to the mill gate increases from roughly 80 euro per cubic meter to up to 110, 120 euro per cubic meter. So significant changes because of changes in the resource, partly assumed under this restoration scenario. And this is what we're further improving now with improving that industry database, because it's never really complete. But it's now possible through satellite-based the Google Earth Engine embeddings. It's possible to recognize log yards and to identify them. And that's what we're working on at the moment to further improve this whole road costing and mills part. Okay, well, I won't go into all these lines, but in any case, we can project this, and if there are wishes later on also by the various country representatives, if you wishes to look into further details into your country, what is happening, or if you have alternative ideas for restoration scenarios, then we're open to look into that. These are some of the conclusions. So very much depends on the restoration trajectory. Drastic interventions, of course, also have well, sometimes negative responses first on indicators, something to really to take into account. It's not only the lines going up. Regional shortages sometimes. The more broadleaves that are being planted that will require substantial adaptation in the wood processing industry. And with that, I think I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Gert-Jan, for the presentation. We are aware it's a lot of knowledge that you try to pack into these 12 minutes. So there's no question from the chat, but I do have a question, because you were mentioning to a certain extent the trade-offs that in forest restoration, improvements in certain indicators can often can be accompanied by declines in other indicators. So when we look at the ecological indicators, how can we evaluate the overall ecosystem recovery when we kind of look into the existing trade-offs, and how can we put the disturbances? So I'm interested in how you do that with the modeling. How can you put the influence of the disturbances that we can expect in the future, both natural and also climate change induced disturbances? How can that be put into the equation when we look into ecological restoration?
Yeah, on the disturbances, what we are now able to deal with is wind disturbances and fire disturbances. We cannot. Well, bark beetles is a highly complex
really
phenomenon.
Difficult.
So that is something we can deal with. It if you gradually change your forest resource. Let's assume the disturbances are not first there, but you already start adapting. Then the stability of the resource, it's the Gales model from Scotland, which is built into our modeling scheme. So if you change your resource and your structure and go to more mixed species and also species that are adapted to the sites, that will of course have an influence on your disturbance damage. And in that way, that it's dynamically integrated in the modeling.
Thank you. I find that fascinating. But of course, like the participants of this webinar are really interested in the more like kind of practical lessons learned or practical guidance. So it's great that you said that he actually, if they are individual country representatives, that they can approach you and that you can give them more detailed results of the presentation of the modeling of the specific countries. I do have another question because we still have 2 minutes and there's no question in the chat that relates to the wood supply. You said that, of course, results of the forest restoration can be that there is a shortage in wood supply, but also that, of course, the new tree species composition in many of the forests, including more broadleaf species, which in some cases need more time to grow, not all of them, but some. And you mentioned that the wood industry needs to adapt to this eventually. Do you have a specific recommendation for?
Well, I would like to throw this at the attendees. How do they see this? What is the? Well, we project a not too rosy perspective of resource availability and strong fluctuations in supply. So what are there are people from country representatives, there are large owner representatives, there's FSC, etc. So what do they think, well, so what, we'll see, or what are they going to do? I throw it back to the attendees.
That's a good question to the attendees, I guess. If there's an immediate hand that we can see is being raised, then we can promote the attendees to a panelist and you can answer live. Otherwise, I suggest that you put your reflections in the chat, I think, which will be really interesting, and I'm happy to pick up the answers after the next presentation. Yeah. So being mindful of the time, then yeah, please feel free to add this to the chat, and we can have a follow-up after the next presentation. But now I want to thank you, Gert-Jan, and I would like to introduce our next two speakers. Yeah, there's excited feedback from the group. Our next two speakers are Yulia Poskakukhina from Prospex Institute and Marcel Hunziker from the Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow and Landscape Research, WSL. And the two of them will talk to us about societal perception of forest restoration across Europe and the importance of stakeholder engagement. So we're looking forward to your presentations.
Yes. Can you see the slides now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. Let me say some words about the purpose of this part of the SUPERB project. Oops, doesn't work. The background of this part was the specific objective of SUPERB to improve the societal support for restoration and its benefits. So to achieve this, we had to know first the actual perspective of the public on the forest restoration. And we also had to learn about the governance and policy mechanisms within the society regarding forest restoration. To gain answers to that, we followed 3 tasks. So one on policy analysis with literature reviews, interviews, surveys, etc. Then one on the societal perspectives, and here we ran interviews, regional surveys, and a large-scale survey in 12 European countries with more than 12,000 respondents. We also
Sorry to interrupt. There's an icon on your PowerPoint. I'm not sure if you can actually, yes. Excellent. Now it looks much brighter. Sorry for interrupting, but it was for a good reason.
Technical issues. Thank you very much, Gesche, to mention that. Didn't see that because I have it on the other screen. Yeah, exactly. So also we cared about the regional governance and conflict analysis, also with interviews, but also with workshops, with interest groups, first in all the 12 countries, then in 5 demo regions. And all these results then fed into the toolkit that is now part of the knowledge gateway, of which we will hear later from Jo, I guess. But let me hopefully pick up some examples. Let us start with the policy analysis. Here we assessed, for example, the restoration policy coherence, both across forest-related policy areas at the European level. You can see that here on the left side with the red and blue table. Red means not so much coherence, blue means a lot of coherence. And he also cared about the coherence between the European level and the national and also regional level. We can see here, we can't read it so well on the right side, where we see where the focus in the different countries lies. I cannot go into details, but try to summarize a little bit the main findings and recommendations of this policy analysis. First, and that's quite important to learn, the policies on the European, national and regional and local level are generally quite coherent. Of course, further alignment of national forest policies with the EU nature restoration legislation can support the implementation of national restoration plans. So there is some room for more action. For the sectoral policies, we found synergies and trade-offs with the forest restoration objectives. There are synergies that should be actually harnessed with the climate, nature conservation and water policies. But there are also trade-offs that should be managed, in particular with the bioenergy, the bioeconomy and the rural development policies. Let's move on to the societal perspectives analysis. Again, I start with one example. We cared, for instance, about the perceived effects of forest restoration on the perceived benefits of forest for the people. And we can see here, I can't go into detail again, but you can see here on a very messy graph that there are not only positive effects, the ones above the bold black line, but there are also negative ones below the black line. So not always forest restoration is perceived positively by the people. This is an important background, but for the main results, which I now will show on this slide, and the main result is that the silent majority, these 12,000 respondents that are representative for the general public in Europe, this silent majority supports forest restoration, and they do it preferably through tax money, investments and policies. But there are differences between countries and regions. There is lower support in the demo regions than in the countries, and lower in north and the center. This has to do whether the forest is part of daily life of the people or not. In particular, in the demo regions, for the people are closely affected sometimes by forest restoration, and therefore it's not always only positively perceived. And this is in particular the case in the north and in the center of Europe. And we will see just afterwards, also in these regions, we have larger regional stakeholder conflicts. The background of this lower support are the partly negatively perceived impacts of forest restoration on the perceived forest benefits like timber production, collection of berries and firewood, etc. That has to do with the messy slide of just before. These perceived or expected negative impacts must be taken seriously to not risk conflicts and decreasing general support of forest restoration. And this means that we have to involve the public views, but if we involve the public views, we also have to consider room for compromises, because otherwise we cannot react on the public views. Let me move on to the general regional governance and conflict analysis. Here we found 4 types of common conflicts related to forest restoration in the demo areas. The most important ones are the conflicts between stakeholder groups. Therefore I deepen a little bit with the summarizing slide on this. The main background, that's important, of the conflicts are that the stakeholders have different values and understandings of forest restoration. It's very often not about the effect itself, but it's about the values behind. And we have seen that very clearly in 4 areas of stakeholder conflicts, which were the timber production and harvesting, hunting culture and traditions, recreation and forest cultural values, and also the land use, other land use types. We have heard that already before by Maitane, that for instance the conflicts with agriculture are often a background of the conflicts. But conflicts can be managed. The most promising approaches are true stakeholder involvement that include the influence on the decisions. That has to do with this room for compromise I just mentioned before. And if there are conflicts, we have to use experts for conflict management and mutual learning procedures. Often also careful planning and zoning helps to avoid any conflicts. And if nothing else helps, financial compensations can help. But we should always try to avoid conflicts. And therefore, Yulia will now tell us more about the stakeholder engagement, where the aim is to avoid these conflicts. Please, Yulia, to continue now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Marcel, also for continuing to manage the slides. So in Superb, we put stakeholder engagement at the heart of the project, both at our in the demos, so in our demo areas, but also at our topic level research. So why did we do this? Well, mainly because the value stakeholder engagement is an enabling commitment for restoration, which is key for its long-term success. And you've heard a little bit also from Marcel and the past speakers about this. Early and meaningful and also ongoing continuous engagement of stakeholders is essential for long-term buy-in to restoration. And through this engagement, stakeholders can grow to feel an eventual sense of ownership over the process and outcome, and through this continuous ownership, support the restoration in the long term. But also very importantly, it's also not only about mitigating conflict and tensions and getting stakeholders on board, it's also about the valuable knowledge that they can offer to strengthen the restoration practice and approaches. This is also a very important aspect of stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please. Who are the stakeholders who we have engaged in Superb, and who also encourage everybody to involve? We see stakeholders as everybody anyone who can affect or be affected by a process, such as, for example, the process of restoration. And this means from practitioners on the ground to forest managers, private and public, of course, to forest owners, to different businesses, to policymakers at different levels, and also the local communities, as well as advocacy nonprofits at different levels. For our topical research work, and also perhaps at the demo level, the who has also been some of you. So for this reason, we've tried to engage representatives of your organizations to help us make our research more relevant to your needs, and also to enrich it with your different types of knowledge. This was also the case for each of the 12 demos. And there was also a particular focus on engaging local communities, people who use the forest for recreation, school children, local businesses as well. This is the who. Next slide, please. On the how. In order for stakeholder engagement to be effective, it's also, of course, good to, or important to implement it in an effective way. And the first step is always careful mapping of the stakeholders to make sure that all the diverse relevant groups and perspectives are included. But at the same time, because there will be a diversity of stakeholders engaged in the restorations, it's important to tailor the strategies to the different stakeholder groups. And overall, recognizing and acknowledging the interest of the different stakeholder groups and creating a safe space for an open discussion is vital, is very central to an effective engagement process. And this requires appreciation of different values that Marcel was also talking about, and also attention and a good understanding of the place and tradition of the locality where you're engaging the stakeholders. Next slide, please. In Superb, we've organized quite a few events to support government officials, but also other actors involved or who will be involved in developing the nature restoration plans, in particular on stakeholder engagement. And our advice has been that from a communications and advocacy viewpoint, it is important to, or is useful to emphasize the advantages and improvements that are linked to the NRPs to also help create this buy-in and a shared understanding of how the NRPs and the restoration can offer broad-based benefits, and to, of course, mitigate some of the tensions. And overall, the key to stakeholder engagement is less to reach consensus, although Marcel, of course, also mentioned consensus building, and that is important in addressing conflicts. But it is also to ensure that all views, including those of the general public, again, that Marcel was mentioning, are heard and considered. This is also a way to mitigate tension and make sure that the ownership is built. So our advice has also been that for the insights gained for the deliberative process on our NRPs to be integrated with the scientific evidence to inform the plans being developed. Excuse me. Sorry. This is a surprise to me in the morning. One valuable tool that we've developed in Superb for finding out a little bit more, also at the demo level, who are the different stakeholders relevant to the restoration process? What are their perspectives? How do they engage with the forests we're working is online social media analysis. It's a really valuable complementary source to identify the issues, but also the narratives, interests, concerns, conflicts, and importantly, unexpected stakeholder groups who you perhaps have missed out in your initial mapping. The question you can pose for the online mapping analysis is, what is the debate around forest restoration in your area? You can look at local, European, and global levels for Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, etc. And also the results of these analyses have proven in Superb at the demo level a very useful engagement tool. Next slide, please. This tool you can find on the Superb Knowledge Gateway, which is one of our, I think, really exciting and really important outputs of the project as a whole, where you can also find all the other tools that the previous participants were talking, the previous speakers were talking about. So the social media analysis tool that we've developed on stakeholder engagement, but also some other tools on stakeholder engagement, also the interviews that Marcel has been mentioning, the methods for analyzing public perceptions. All of them can also be found on this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia and Marcel. Julia, please take the time to drink a bit of water. Excellent. So we don't have questions in the Q&A so far, but I wanted to remind you that Gert-Jan is really curious to hear from you what your perspectives are, in case you're representative of the industry or of a country. If you're worried what do you think about the models, etc., please add it in the Q&A. And now, since there's no concrete question from the Q&A right now, I do have a question. So my first question goes to Julia. Based on your experience with the very diverse workshops, both on the European level and also in the demos, what is the kind of main learning now for the preparation and implementation of the nature restoration regulation in the EU member states in terms of stakeholder engagement? Because stakeholder engagement is supposed to be a main part of the development and also of the implementation of the plans, the national restoration plans. So is there a main learning in terms of stakeholder engagement, apart from that you have to do it and that it's useful?
It kind of relates to the reason, I guess, why it is important to do it. That besides kind of, the fact that through the stakeholder engagement process, you can channel and draw important, valuable insights for the planning, for the plan itself, for its implementation, and also create buy-in. What's really valuable is creating a community among the stakeholders who are participating. And also kind of using this opportunity of creating national restoration plans to create more collaboration and more dialogue among the different people working on restoration at the local level, regional level, you name it, because there's so much to share, as we found out through our events, and so much interest in sharing it, but fewer opportunities to do so. So increasingly after our events, both at the demo, but also in our kind of topical level workshop, people were just really excited about, being able to come together, to address problems together, to be inspired from each other, to build connections for future collaboration. So that was a really key learning, and again, speaks to why it is important to engage in stakeholder engagement for this process.
Thank you very much, Julia. Yes, and I absolutely agree that it creates this ownership, and then people are also willing to support this in the long term if they have participated in the process and contributed to it, and then they will also be multipliers of the knowledge that they collected throughout this process, etc. So, yeah. And yes, I will share the link to the tool box that you mentioned in the chat in a minute. I do have a question to Marcel as well, because we still have 2 minutes before the break. Marcel, what is your explanation why in specific countries there was more support for forest restoration than in others? I remember Central Europe, for instance, people were a bit more reserved.
Yeah, I mean, the main reason, as very briefly mentioned, is whether they are actually affected or not. I mean, that's why we have this difference between the general public of all over the countries and the demo areas. The more it becomes concrete, the more they might be affected. There might be, for instance, a fence. That's something very critical, in particular in Central Europe and in the north. If access is not allowed, that's something in the forest that is always very, very critical, and we have to deal with that very carefully and to clearly inform why the access is restricted. That's in particular in the north, and also in Switzerland and Germany, I would say that's critical. So their information is needed, and if the people are affected, then the support decreases a bit. That's absolutely the main reason behind. And then, of course, in some countries, forest plays a more important role than for daily life of the general public than in other countries. And again, this is in particular the case in the central countries of Europe, and very, very clearly in the north. You might know about everybody's right of access in the north, which is a very important principle in the Scandinavian countries. Therefore, these regions or countries are a bit more critical. Whereas in particular, for instance, in Spain, we have had a very strong support for forest restoration. And there it was also about fire. And also in France, it was about fire prevention, etc. And there the people see an advantage for their own daily life in these regions where the forests are. And therefore we have this difference. It also has to do with the type of forest restoration that is applied in the different areas.
So it also has to do with the restoration measures, of course.
Exactly.
There's now a question in the Q&A, and maybe Julia, you can have a quick answer to it. It is the question: how do you, as a small private forest owner, get people involved in your restoration project, or would you recommend to get involved in more large-scale restoration projects?
I
You
think
have a little tip, and then they can get
Really
more information on the gateway.
I think really great that you're also interested about this. Thank you for the question. I think if you're a small forest owner, you will also be very welcome as part of a big restoration project. So I think it's definitely worth looking into what's out there. Probably a good place to start would be your municipality. Looking at what nonprofits exist in the region that might be working on forest restoration. Perhaps also industry sometimes is also involved. I know there's a new project called, I think, SMURF, that is focusing on small forest owners in particularly. And if you haven't reached or if you haven't explored it, I strongly recommend. We're not involved in this project directly, but nevertheless, strongly recommend looking it up, SMURF. In terms of engaging people around you, really quickly, our main finding from most of our demos that it's just really important to talk to people in the field. So it's just important to kind of go out there, think of who could be important, maybe go to local institutions that you think would be relevant to get municipality, maybe cultural centers, maybe at more regional level, just go there if you have the time and opportunity and begin engagement like that. So kind of in-person, in the field engagement is usually a very effective approach.
Thank you very much, Julia and Marcel. We will now go on a quick break. We will meet again in around 8 minutes, and then we will hear about biodiversity credits, nature markets, options and constraints. Looking forward to that. Hello again, everyone. Hope you had the time to grab a coffee and that you're now fresh again for our next round of presentations. The next presentation, as I already promised, is going to deal with biodiversity credits and nature markets and the related research that we did in Superb and beyond. And our speakers are Sophus to Ermgassen from the University of Oxford and our colleague from EFI, Sven Wunder. So I can see Sophus is there, Sven is there. Excellent. And now you can start to share your presentation.
Very good. Can you all see this? Everyone happy?
Yes, we can see it and we can also hear you perfectly.
Very good. Okay, thanks so much. Very happy to be here. So my name's Sophus to Ermgassen, and I've been working with Sven and others in the Superb program in our biodiversity finance work package to basically explore how we can finance biodiverse ecosystems and forests now and into the future. So today I'm going to give a very brief overview of investment in biodiversity in Europe, and then set the stage for Sven to present some of our work on biodiversity credits that relates to the nature markets framework. Okay, so the big picture here is that the new EU multi-annual financial framework looks like ring-fenced biodiversity funding is going to be slashed. So it looks like there's going to be a substantial reduction in public funding in biodiversity over the next decade. And there's a growing policy emphasis on reducing pressure on public budgets. That's not just in the EU, that's also, I mean, basically everywhere. I do a lot of work in the UK where that's a really strong emphasis. Farming in Europe is also under serious economic pressures, and the common agricultural policy's biodiversity impacts are pretty weak. So there's big areas for improvements in the efficiency of the way that we spend public funds on biodiversity. And that's not going to be addressed in the talk today, which is focusing on credits, but there's other work that Superb has done. Charlotte and Thomas from the Biodiversity Finance Work Package have been doing work on improving the efficiency of public subsidies for forest restoration as well. So what are the important high-level policy drivers that are affecting biodiversity finance in Europe right now? Well, the overarching framework is Target 19 of the Kunming-Montreal Agreement, which basically commits the global community to upscaling biodiversity investment to $200 billion a year by 2030. And it explicitly, in the wording of the Kunming-Montreal Agreement, advocates for the use of credits, offsets, and other kind of innovative financial instruments for achieving this upscaling. On the demand side, who will actually buy products that increase biodiversity? There's a bunch of policy drivers that are aiming to increase basically demand side pressure for increasing biodiversity. And these include the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, the CSRD, and probably most importantly, the EU Restoration Regulation, which sets out legally binding targets to deliver restoration across Europe, but ultimately does not have a comprehensive funding plan behind achieving those targets. So there's a lot of interest in how we can attract more funding to achieve those policy goals. There's also drivers of actual potential cash flows, ways that people can earn money from improving biodiversity. So some of these are being outlined preliminarily in things like the EU's Nature Markets Roadmap and EU's carbon farming regulation. So these are aiming to establish the policy frameworks about how landholders can earn money from delivering nature improvements. And in England, where I do a lot of my work, we also have this interesting case study, which is a very useful case study for what is happening in the EU, because we've been experimenting with some of this stuff since Brexit. So we have a few years head start experimenting on some of this stuff. And in England, we have our biodiversity net gain national biodiversity market, which also gives us some clues. So one of the things that we did in Superb is try and understand the state of play in national nature markets across Europe. So that's the UK and the EU. And basically, what you can see is that the purple ones are places where something like mandatory or near mandatory nature markets already exist. So that's either nature-based carbon or biodiversity markets. And then we've got a bunch of places in the EU that have operational nature-based carbon markets, and then lots of places where these things are in discussion already. So what we've put in this map, there are many, many other initiatives that are not included in this map, because this map only includes government-backed schemes. So there's many, 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 many private initiatives to create private carbon credits with private governance that exist elsewhere. There's many in the Nordics, for example, that are not included in this map. This is only government-backed schemes. So a really important piece of legislation here is the Nature Credits Roadmap, which is the EU's roadmap to scaling nature credits up to 2027, when we want to start piloting this stuff. And it does some really important things. So one is it distinguishes certificates from credits, credits being basically verified biodiversity outcomes, certificates being verified biodiversity actions. Then it establishes the need for mandatory co-benefits on biodiversity from the carbon farming methodologies under the carbon farming regulations. And that's interesting because we're hoping to avoid the mistakes of other systems, like some places in the international voluntary carbon market, where plantation monoculture has been the default way that we deliver carbon benefits. So improving the biodiversity benefits of the biodiversity that's delivered through carbon farming regulations is something that's established in the Nature Credits Roadmap. One of the things that's really missing from the Nature Credits Roadmap that is going to be a clear area of research and policy effort over the next few years is where the demand for these biodiversity credits will come from. It's still a really big unknown. So there's lots of potential drivers, but there's nothing that's really concrete just yet. And then it also discusses, the proliferation of new biodiversity credits methodologies, which Sven will cover next. So we have lots of lessons, as I say, from the United Kingdom, from our policy experiment that we've been conducting since Brexit, which basically gave the UK the flexibility to try a bunch of stuff outside the Common Agricultural Policy. And this is essentially, I've just thrown up a bunch of the papers that we have been doing with Superb and I've been doing with colleagues at Oxford relating to the English nature markets that can inform the EU's experience. But what these the sum total of these things show is that a lot of people in Europe, they come to me and they see the UK as a kind of a case study of good practice. And what I would say is it's a really wonderful case study for learning, but definitely not everything has gone right. So there's also a lot we can learn in the EU from what has gone wrong in the English system. So one of the classic ones in the English system, for example, is that we've set up a design where when developers harm nature, they have the choice of either buying nature credits through our national nature market or delivering nature themselves within their own developments. And generally, this pathway has been seen as much cheaper and easier and less well regulated. And so we've seen most of the vast majority of the demand in our national nature market actually enter this developer-led compliance pathway instead. So we've done a lot of, unfortunately, one of the things we've learned is that a lot of demand has been sucked out of our English domestic nature market by giving developers other ways of essentially bypassing the market, other regulatory pathways for doing this. So there's lessons like this that we've learned here in England that I think can be really, really informative for the rollout of nature credits in the EU. Now, over the last 4 years on Superb, we've been doing a lot of work on biodiversity finance. And I keep on giving this talk, and I notice that there's some common misperceptions in the kind of conservation-focused or forest restoration-focused or nature finance community that I think are not substantiated by the evidence. So I really quickly want to summarize some of those things here. So a common perception that I often see in policy circles is that markets really dominate the discussion because they're seen as more efficient or effective than direct public investment in nature. And actually, I think that's really not substantiated by the evidence. What we've seen is that there's been one nature market around the world over the last 30 years that has delivered very high rates of additionality. So it's been rather successful at creating nature restoration, but all of the others are actually seriously underperformed. So I think the statement is actually not are markets more efficient than direct public policies, what we've learned from the last few years of work is that actually, basically, the devil is in the detail. There are some terrible markets and there are some good markets, and there are some terribly ineffective public policies and there are some very effective public policies. So the dichotomy, markets versus public policies, is not true. It's not substantiated by the evidence. Some are good and some are bad, and it's all dependent on design. There's this common perception that nature credits are a new thing. They're totally not. They've been widely applied in certain countries for over 30 years. And we actually have loads of scientific evidence about how to do them well. And it's really time now to start paying attention to this past evidence so that we don't continue replicating the same mistakes as we have in the past, which is a big focus of our work, is what we've learned from our historical experiences to make sure the next round of nature credit systems don't do the obvious things wrong that we've learned from the past. I think a common perception that ecologists get really stuck up on is that the hardest thing is how to measure nature. But actually, if you look at nature credit systems all around the world, they define how they measure nature in all sorts of weird ways. The way that we measure nature is actually just a social convention that everybody has to agree on. And it's not that hard. Lots of systems around the world have defined ways of measuring nature. They might not be very good, but we have, like, as a community, agreed how to measure nature in that particular context. So the measurement of nature has not really been the problem. The real problem in nature credit systems so far has been compliance, really low compliance rates around the world in historic nature markets. So it's not nature measurement, it's how to make sure that the things really happen in reality. That's the real barrier, in my opinion. And that's backed by the evidence. I think there's this misperception that if you create a nature credit scheme, then the money will flow, then you'll get private investment in nature. And that's absolutely not true. There's been lots and lots of nature credit schemes over history that have attracted no investment at all. The money flows only really when there's a mandatory driver of demand. The only exception to this is we had big money in the past going into the international voluntary carbon market without a mandatory driver of demand. But a lot of that demand stripped away following the Guardian investigation, the additionality problems that were discovered in 2023. All of the world's biggest nature markets, most of which are in the United States, there is a mandatory policy driver of demand. That's how you get big money flowing through these nature markets. It doesn't really happen voluntarily very much. And then lastly, I think there's this really interesting misperception, which is that a lot of people want to attract institutional capital into nature markets. So that's big institutional money. And there's this perception that if you generate, a nature credit system that allows you to derive financial returns from nature, then you'll attract large-scale investment. But there's a huge gap between something being a bit profitable and something attracting large-scale institutional investment. Mainstream investment only invests in projects that deliver market rates of risk-adjusted returns. So that is returns that are equivalent to the other returns opportunities that are available for them in the market. Biodiversity is not special for an institutional investor. To attract institutional investment, these things have to be as profitable as other investments in the universe of investments. So, for example, there was this recent paper published by Flammer et al. That looked at the investments of a private equity firm specializing in biodiversity investment. And it went through all of their investments and asked, okay, so what are they investing in? And essentially, the projects that they were investing in that featured pure private finance, they were delivering an internal rate of return, so an annual return of nearly 15% a year. So that's what you need to attract institutional investment. And it's not just being a little bit profitable, it's being extremely profitable that attracts large-scale investment. Interestingly, that paper also found that there's a big conversation about de-risking biodiversity investment in the EU, but de-risking really doesn't actually get you that far. So this paper found that even with de-risking, these investments need to be delivering around 12% a year in order to attract institutional money. So one of the things that we've learned in Superb and in this paper that we wrote earlier this year in Nature, Ecology and Evolution, where we interviewed biodiversity finance specialists all across Europe, is if we want to upscale nature markets, right, that governments play an absolutely critical role. Governments need to basically create those markets. They need to govern them to ensure that there is actually demand in those markets and it's not diverted into other places. And then if you actually want institutional money in these markets, then government probably also needs to subsidize investors to even enter them in the first place. So private investment is public policy. Right? These things, again, it's a false dichotomy. Private versus public is not a thing. Private investment is entirely enabled by public policy. And then it's also, I think, a completely open question of whether scaling up nature markets at all is the best way of delivering biodiversity finance. I think it's a completely open question whether or not it's more efficient, cost effective, or even cheaper to governments than just doing direct public investment, like, for example, CAP, but with massive improvements in the efficiency of how we spend agri-environment subsidies. Right? So that's everything I have to say, and over to Sven to talk about biodiversity credits.
Thank you so much, Sophus. I will set on my slides. So my name is Sven Wunder. I'm a principal scientist with EFI based in Barcelona. And I'm going to show you out of this work package on Superb on finance, where Sophus has now presented some of the overarching considerations. So we're going to dive in one of these particular tools, namely biodiversity credits, which of course now during the course of the project also turned out to be extremely topical in terms of the roadmap to nature credits that is devised by the Commission. So biodiversity credits, what is it all about? So we brought together a bigger group of people who've been working on related issues to make a review article where we wanted to particularly look at those markets we already know, like carbon markets and biodiversity offsets, and what have we learned over the years from those markets, and how can we make sure not to repeat the mistakes that we have been observing. And beyond of that academic article that we published, there are also a couple of policy briefs. This executive policy brief by EFI, sort of a short introduction to what it is and to the policy recommendations, but also a larger kind of info brief, which we did with the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance, that also provided some seed funding to this project. So basically, biodiversity credits are like the voluntary arms of these biodiversity improving actions. There's a pool of projects that create these things, and a voluntary investment is what we see as essential for biodiversity credits, whereas we have already an offsets market that somehow is more engaged in complying with rules that are put forward. But there are also some common areas. There are some of these credits created from the supply side that are also traded as offsets. So projects may be supplying both types of demand. And a number of fungible effects obviously also at play. But we were trying to kind of assess all of the information we could find about ongoing markets, construct a database for biodiversity credits, which is comprehensive also in terms of the variables included that we know. And this is kind of a graphical representation, a map, a bit similar to what Sophus presented for Europe. This is kind of the schemes that are out there, and at what different stage they are from being in preparation to being fully operational. And we certainly can see there's been some parts in the world where there's been a greater effort. A lot is in the Anglophone countries that just love markets and competitive mechanisms. And England, as we saw, is one of them. But also a country like Colombia, for instance, has had an enormous amount of different initiatives to create biodiversity credits. So Sophus already touched upon the question about the demand. And, you know, the way this discussion is being put forward is to see, well, what would we need in terms of financing the actions? How much is the public sector by now able to provide, and some of the other sources? And then the gap that emerges is, well, that's what we have to get from the private sector. I don't think that's a very realistic way of going about this business. And I think maybe also some of the statements that have been coming out of the Commission are too optimistic about how much you can raise, because currently a lot of it comes out of corporate social responsibility and philanthropic sources. If we have some regulations in the future, that could certainly stimulate private investments, but then we would be more into something that is more like the offsets market. But as long as it's fully voluntary, the key question is, you know, why would the private sector really want to invest on a very large scale in something that is essentially a public good? The biodiversity is in many ways a public good. And also, if we now have like a situation where all the flowers are growing, we have all kinds of methodologies out there. Some of them are good, a lot of them are questionable. So if we kind of try to adopt more rigorous methods, then that will also boil down the market, at least in the short run, to something smaller, more of a niche market. So some of the perspectives coming out of that, I think an important thing to realize also what biodiversity credits are doing is it is kind of a commodification of nature. And some people would object to that also in a philosophical terms, that we need to care for nature for other reasons. Well, this is sort of trying to push the monetary reason. And under that umbrella of biodiversity credits, you can obviously do a lot of actions. The important thing is that you're selling some improvement, but how you do it, that can be very different in different case studies. I think the market size expectations are hyped currently, as Sophus also has been alleging to. And compared to carbon markets, I think the challenges are in a way greater. So a lot of critique currently is around about carbon markets, and that it has been creating hot air in many ways. So now we set out to do something more difficult, more challenging, with basically the same methodologies. We have to be careful. The measurement is more difficult. It's multidimensional. The time lags between the actions and actual improvement in biodiversity may often be larger than they are for carbon markets. And hence, there are the same type of problems with creating additionality. You will have the same type of selection biases that you have seen in the carbon markets, maybe going somewhere where there's not a real threat and then protect it and then claim a benefit for that. That is not really creating an additionality vis-a-vis a counterfactual. And finally, the whole how you're setting up this the market's infrastructure, the institutional setup. I think in carbon markets have basically been self-regulating to a large extent, and that has not been a great experience, because if the rules are being set, they're often being set too lax, and even if actors are originally well-intentioned, they will tend to gravitate towards some of the sort of easy way out, where you can create credits in an easy way, but not necessarily achieve path-breaking results for the environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sven and Sophus, for your presentations. We have now 5 minutes for Q&A. And there's again a question from Isaac from PFC International, and it goes to Sophus. He wants to have something very concrete. Which market are you referencing to that has been effective, and what makes it unique? Because you mentioned in your presentation that there's a lot of experience actually. So what works and what and why?
For the only market where an impact evaluation has shown that it created a lot of habitat that would not otherwise have been created is the US wetland mitigation system. So that's under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. It's by far the world's largest biodiversity market, a few billion that flow through it each year. And it's quite interesting. So it's successful partly because it's old and it's been through lots of reforms. So they had a major reform 2008 or so, following 20 years of practice, where they basically changed a bunch of the regulations to make sure that they wouldn't keep on making the mistake from the past. So it's old and it's stronger for that. The major thing that makes it effective is basically when you create a wetland, it is really easy to see that you're creating a wetland. So it's much easier to account for the creation of wetland habitat than in other nature markets, such as the voluntary carbon market, than it is to observe whether or not some deforestation has been avoided. So basically, the high levels of additionality in the wetland mitigation system come because the restoration actions that are initiated in the market are really easy to observe. So that is something that is definitely an interesting lesson for the EU nature credits system, right? We can commodify all sorts of stuff, but it's much, much harder to check if something is real, if it's really hard to observe. So one of the major lessons here is that the most effective nature markets are basically commodifying something that you can quite easily see from space, because then we can all check if it actually
and we can track it and see how successful it really is. Thank you. So there's another question in the Q&A coming from Simon Fleckenstein, who has also been working in Superb. And it goes to Sophus, but maybe also to Sven. What approach do you envision for making the demand for nature credits mandatory? Because that was listed as one of your main takeaways, Sophus.
The answer is, I don't think we know yet, and this is going to be a major program of work for the Commission and the Commission's nature credit team over the next few years. Basically, in all the places where this stuff has been made mandatory, they apply it to new developments or land clearing. So those are the pathways where, like, the polluter pays pathways that have historically worked. And so those are the leverage points that would be the easiest to adopt from other kinds of practices. But there is the world is also changing fast. It doesn't work exactly the same way as it used to. So there are new mechanisms that might plausibly work. So, for example, under CSRD or the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosure, there are guidelines about reporting the contributions that you make to improving nature. So in many cases, they're non-mandatory, but there are these pathways for that. And these are quite interesting avenues where regulatory changes might make some of those demand drivers mandatory in the future. So we should keep an eye on all of these things where we can pull a little lever and turn a voluntary reporting requirement today into a mandatory driver of investment tomorrow, I think.
Future. Thanks. Do you have an add-on, Sven?
Yes. There's a question or sort of a comment from Gert-Jan as well in the chat. She's saying, thanks, Sven. Through the modeling, we show that some biodiversity indicators actually go down for 2 to 4 decades. So yes, this is even more complex than the carbon markets that basically also failed already since the Kyoto Protocol. So I think, yes, this is a challenge. And If we were to, I mean, there's many of the environmental market observers that are saying we should only pay for the impacts. But if these, once the impacts have been observed, so that we can see that it's for real. But if we have to wait for 2 to 4 decades to actually know if these impacts are materializing, we have a problem in terms of financing the actions that are here now. So I think setting up something like that there are 2 pathways. Either you actually you go back to financing actions, and then that you seem to be credible, and then hope for that they achieve these impacts, or you need like a banking structure of some kind where you are where someone is a bank is putting up some of these resources to kind of make a guarantee for the future impacts. But that would be challenging also if the returns have to be as high, the yearly returns have to be as high as Sophus has scheduled. So lots of challenges there in terms of the private sector financing and the profitability levels that are required.
Thank you very much, Sven. Actually, we have to move on to the next presentation, but we have a time for feedback, discussion, and closing in the end. So, and I know that Sophus is only available right now, so I will still ask the question and then shorten a bit in the end. Question comes from Amelia Meskin from EUSTAFOR, and it is related to what you, Sophus, answered to Isaac's questions. Which activities would be easy to market in a forestry context?
The easy one is the plantation of forest where it was not previously. That's the really easy one. The really hard one, which I don't think we have science to establish yet, is the improvement of forestry management in existing forests, because it's really hard to observe that from space. So that is very hard to commodify. And we're getting pretty good at commodifying avoided deforestation. So Sven, for example, has played a pivotal role in creating the new generation of impact evaluation methods that allow us to observe whether or not deforestation has been avoided. So we are getting pretty close to having sufficient science to tell if some forests have been created where there weren't any already, to demonstrate that some deforestation has been avoided where it might otherwise have been delivered. But we are, it's still really, really hard to commodify improvements in forest quality, which are very hard to observe from space because you have to get through the forest canopy, basically.
Yes, and which are still really important to at least implement, right? So that's going to be a challenge that we might be improving a bit with the Earth observation methods in the future still, or the kind of inventory methods. So yeah, positive prospects at least a bit. Thank you very much, Sophus and Sven, for your presentations. I am aware that there's a really interesting input from Clémence Dirac in response to Gert-Jan's question, so we will pick that up in the end again. And now I would like to hand over to my colleague Jo Hara from Future Arc. She has been leading the upscaling work in Superb, and she will present us with the restoration marketplace. And thanks for stepping in for Thomas Lundhede, who was supposed to present this today, but is not available. Thank you, Jo.
Thanks, Gesche. And also this fits really nicely in with what we've just heard from Sven and Sophus. So we're kind of going from the really big picture here about nature markets right down to one bit of the jigsaw that might be able to help to enable things in the longer term. So that's the sort of context that that I'm presenting this. And I will just share my screen and go into presenter mode. Right. So hopefully you are seeing that presentation now. So as Gesche said,
no, sorry.
Is it not there?
No.
Hold on. Okay, then I shall try again.
Yes, there it is, Jo.
Is it there now? Okay,
yes.
great. Okay, sorry about that. So as Gesche said, I'm presenting this on behalf of Thomas Lundhede, who was leading this and is unable to make it today from the University of Copenhagen. We've also partnered with OPLA and with our sister project Merlin. So we were coming at this from something more than just forests. Merlin is a freshwater restoration project that is part of the cluster of projects that we're doing for this presentation. And I know for the audience that we have out there, often you will own areas of land that have more than just trees on them. And so you're interested in more than just forest restoration. There might be other things involved. Okay, so just get my next slide on. So having heard all of that from Sophus and from Sven, I often hear people talking about the whole world of biodiversity markets, carbon markets has been a bit of a wild west. It's a kind of the new frontier in finance, and a few cowboys out there, possibly, a few things that have failed, pioneers, cowboys, all that sort of thing around the Wild West. And so some people are a bit cautious and nervous of it. You heard some of this in Sven's presentation. I think it's a bit more like growing pains, and it's like a rampaging toddler going around trying lots of things, breaking lots of stuff, getting a lot of stuff wrong. But it has to be part of the mix going forward, because the gap in biodiversity finance is so massive. And just as Sophus said, pressure on public budgets is going in one direction, and the demand for this money is going up. So how can we get that much better blend of public and private finance? The way that we've approached this within Superb is just one part of this jigsaw was to create a marketplace. So a place where buyers and sellers of certificates, credits, whatever we define as our unit of value, can actually meet each other and start having that conversation about transactions. This is what we're talking about in the marketplace. It's not going to solve all those big issues we've just heard about, but it's one thing that you need to have. You need to have a place where people can buy and sell. And this wasn't being done in a way, it was being seen as a bit of friction in the whole process. And it was to see if we could create a lower friction and maybe higher integrity place that addressed some of the concerns that Sophus described, such as additionality, permanence, and leakage. So why do we think this was needed? Exactly what we've just heard is, is it about a lack of supply? We've heard this from investors. Oh, we've got so much money to invest. There's just not enough projects for us. We heard this back in 2020. Got the project saying, we've got this project, nobody's speaking to us. Nobody wants what we have potentially to offer in terms of really good restoration. So was it a lack of demand? And then there's also this question about, well, where is the value in this? Where is the value flow? Where is that 14.7% internal rate of return, for example, that Sophus was referring to? So these are the sort of things that a marketplace could maybe help with. Because the other question is, well, even if all of those were, you need to have a market mechanism through which things can work and you can reduce losses at each stage of the transaction. So what we've heard is there's no shortage of projects. There isn't a shortage of supply. So we don't need to worry that there's a lack of supply. There is a question mark about the value that these sorts of projects can provide, particularly without governments driving this mandatory driver of demand that Sophus was talking about. Absolutely, you're not going to get value unless people have to do this, and then they're going to try and find derive value from it. Lack of demand. Oops, sorry, it's come in the wrong way. Lack of demand, I think I would question whether there is actually a lack of demand at the moment, whether there is sufficient demand at the moment. There are a lot of corporates saying, oh yeah, we're just here with our money, just need to make it easier for us at scale, and we're there and ready. And I'm not sure that the demand piece is actually there. Whether there are markets that allow these things to work, there definitely does seem to be something in this. And I work on a number of these sort of schemes where we're trying to match projects with owners and what have you. And it doesn't happen happen in terms of the financial side and the people who are working on the ground in forestry, there needs to be something that links the two. So if the markets aren't working, what are the things where there are problems? Well, are there viable business models that give enough returns? What's the competition for capital? Again, you know, if you're a corporate and you've got a lot of money, where are you going to spend it? There's other competition, other places where you can go to more simply and get a better rate of return. We've seen a lot of problems with reputational risk and green hushing that's evolved over the duration of this project, and people maybe kind of not wanting to speak so loud about what they're doing in this area. Marketing, do the potential buyers of these goods even know what's available, and what they're buying and what they're not buying? Scale, I've already mentioned. And then there's also the transaction costs, a lot of nervousness about middlemen taking their cut, and people wanted to try and avoid this. So what the marketplace is addressing is those last three. So we're looking to ways to bring projects forward at scale. Upscaling is a big theme of Superb. Can we address this presentation of projects in a way that's meaningful to potential purchasers, and also what can we do to absolutely minimize the transaction costs? We can do this within a project like Superb because we're not looking to build a long-term business model from this. So we can look at it. We're not trying to be a middleman. So it's trying to kind of get this as passive as possible to reduce the transaction costs. So what does the marketplace do? What it provides is a platform that can showcase projects in a way that addresses some of these concerns, as I say, about additionality, permanence, and leakage. It connects people within a managed environment. So it's sitting on an existing platform called Opla, which is a much, much larger nature restoration platform, but that manages everything. So once Superb finishes at the end of this month, it will be there within Opla, and it's managed within that environment. And all sorts of things like GDPR and what have you are all continue to be managed, and it will endure beyond the end of Superb. It has the potential to collate and aggregate multiple objectives on the basis of what the buyer is looking for, so to give you the scale. It's a passive platform. Once it's there, it's there. There's no ongoing cost of running it. And once the connection is made, it just enables the connection. And that's a very low transaction, or there's zero transaction cost other than putting a bit of time in. The other thing it does is it puts European forest sites within the wider context of other restoration activity and also global. So Opla showcases global sites as well. So if this does start to work, we've got a platform there that's very scalable, potentially in the longer term, should somebody want to do it. What it doesn't do, we're not trying to certify or verify. This is all about self-disclosure from the owner of the project. It doesn't do anything about contracting. All it's doing is that, as Elisabeth said right at the start, is it match makes. And it doesn't enable any financial transaction. There's no financial transactions in this marketplace. It's literally a place where you go to meet people and meet projects. So I'll just take us now so that you can see what the site looks like, if I can find the right part on my screen. Excuse me a minute. Okay, so this is us in the restoration marketplace website now, which I'm hopefully you're still seeing. Elisabeth, can you give me a thumbs up if you're seeing?
No,
No,
you
we're
should
seeing
share
the
a
link.
different screen.
Okay. Oh, damn.
I guess you were sharing the slide directly.
How about now?
And you would have to share your screen. So stop sharing and share again.
Yes, there it is.
Here we go. Super.
Right. Okay, thank you. So here we are in the restoration marketplace, which we'll share the link to. And you find this from our gateway, which you're going to hear from Gesche in a minute. And on this, it's a very, very simple interface. Here's the marketplace. There's a map. You can zoom in and look for sites within an area. There's also a separate page where you can say, I'm looking for projects that are forest, freshwater, whatever, in certain geographies that are doing different types of work. So all sorts of search criteria that you can use. As well as the map. And then you can go into here and you can find projects that you're interested in. There's also, we've just got one live at the moment, others will be going on over time. which is a presentation of the project. We guide you through how to present a project in a way that we believe will be meaningful to people who are looking to invest. Okay. You can go on and look at this afterwards. So if you click on this project, you'll see what they're doing in this Sweden project to present themselves as a way to attract potential investors. It's a very simple interface, so you can add your project here. It goes through a very simple questionnaire. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes to upload a project on there and ask questions where you will say, as a project owner, what have you done to prove that this is additional? What controls have you got in place so that you are, and if you haven't got any, you can put projects up if you don't have any of this information, but what it's going to do is make you less attractive to a potential investor. So that's how that will all work. And then the project will go up, and then it's available and it's promoted on Opla and promoted by whoever wants to use this. After the end of this project, it is there and it's potentially developable to aggregate things and to present them to investors. There is also a place in here where you can connect with other projects who are restoring, whether or not they are looking for finance. So it's part of this building a community, building a restoration community, and that can be on the investment side or on the project side. Okay, so that's the project, that's the marketplace and how it works. But to go back to what I said at the start, what this addresses is the marketing, the scale and transaction cost piece of the jigsaw. Without governments creating mandatory markets for this type of product, exactly what Sophus said, there won't be any value. If there's not a value transaction to be had, you don't need a marketplace because there's no market. So this fills in part of it, but those other pieces need to be in place, I think, for this really to fly. But it's there, it's scalable, and people can start playing with it and trying things on and putting them on. Okay, so that's the marketplace, and I will turn off the presentation now and stop sharing my screen. If I can. Apologies about this. In case there are any questions. Gesche, can you stop me sharing?
Actually, I can't, but I can. Okay, so I can replace you in sharing by starting to share the Forest Knowledge Gateway. However, there's no, just to kind of already show the image of the next presentation, but I couldn't see any question in the Q&A.
There is now.
There is now. Okay, then I will go to this. Have we been able to present this marketplace to investors? Maybe interest will come to upload projects when there are clear investors already present.
Yeah, so do you want me to answer that then?
Yes, please.
So we have discussed this with investors all the way through the development, both the concept of it, and also we had a couple of meetings, one in Copenhagen and one in Edinburgh, with potential investors. I think that there is interest, but I think the lack of maturity in the rest of the market means that this is maybe a bit ahead of the curve with them. We've had more interest from people who are potentially going to present, and I think the investors, it's going to be down to, I think, people who have projects. If they make an initial connection with an investor, they can then say, go and look at all of our sites. They're all there already for you to look at on the marketplace. So we have engaged with investors. We know the things that they're concerned about, and that's what we're trying to address. Investors aren't going to bother looking on here until we have enough sites on here. So we're a bit kind of chicken and egg in this.
Yeah, that's correct. And this is maybe also to encourage participants of this webinar to use the marketplace.
Yeah.
So to be able to offer more projects there, because only this way, and only if they have a set a certain scale, we will be able to attract investors. So
yeah, please have a go. Start, register with Oppler. It's free. It's very straightforward, and start trying to put stuff up. You actually, there's a very little downside of this. You're not committing to anything. So I would just recommend people starting to have a play with it.
thank you very much, Joe. There's no further question in the chat. In case there are more, then feel free to ask them throughout the next presentation. They're clapping hands. Joe, thank you very much also for stepping in for Thomas. And now I will continue with the Forest Knowledge Gateway, and I will present it live. Can you see my screen? Perfect. Excellent. I shared it already before. That's the Forest Knowledge Gateway. It is a platform that we designed to provide knowledge both from the practical and from the scientific perspective on forest restoration, on how to adapt the forest to climate change, how to conserve biodiversity, and also how to manage the forest in a more integrative way. And I will guide you through the platform now because it's live. It has a lot of content already. We've worked on this very hard in the past 2 years, a huge collaborative effort with the entire Superb Consortium, and also together with the Transform It project, and with a lot of support also from some of the stakeholders we engaged with, feedback from the forest owners' perspective, etc. So it's a huge collaborative effort, and we're very proud that it's there now. So as you can see, the main page is pretty straightforward. Introduction to the gateway. Then we have the knowledge pathways, link to the knowledge pathways that I will introduce to you in a minute. And then we have access to the resources. Now my mouse is not doing what I want. The most recent resources, as you can see here, diverse types of resources, and then you have the link to the marketplace. And now I will introduce you to the knowledge pathways. There are 4 knowledge pathways, which are stakeholder targeted stakeholder targeted guidance through the restoration journey from the stakeholder perspective. So we carefully designed and curated those pathways based on the knowledge available through Superb. And I will briefly show you how the planners and implementers user journey looks like. We have identified certain steps that are relevant in the restoration process, following the management cycle, and it goes from assessment to really planning and design to implementation, ongoing management, and then in the end monitoring and evaluation. So also wherever you are in your restoration process, you can kind of go into those different steps and look into the subchapters. As you can see here, just as an example, when you look into assessment, there are different steps in this assessment, and we provide you very tailored knowledge here that is based on the Superb work. And I can show you the texts are rather short, so they really provide you with an overview, and then below the overview, you have related resources that we added there. So if you want to dig deeper into different aspects of that specific subchapter, you can go to the resources, the related resources. So going back now, and we have 4 of those knowledge pathways. We have a knowledge pathway for the planners and implementer that I've just shown you. We have a knowledge pathway for the policy actors. We have a knowledge pathway for the funders and investors that is still under development, but we have some chapters already online, and we are now heavily working on the knowledge pathway for landowners and practitioners, which we believe will also be quite relevant for some of the participants in this call. So it will be online in the next 2 weeks, where we have really tailored guidance for the more small-scale forest owners and the people who work directly with the land. So it's even more tailored to your needs, or what we have identified through the exchange with many of you as your needs. Then, as you can see, maybe just to mention in general, you can see on top here that you can translate into different languages. Actually, all the content can be translated. However, it is an AI translation, so the quality is not the same for all the translation, because AI is not so advanced in all the languages. But for the knowledge pathways, we are working with colleagues from the different countries to improve the translation. So we have the chance to edit them manually, because in some cases the terminology is not convincing. So that's something we're still working on. So bear with us. Then the guidelines. We have 3 types of guidelines so far. There might be more in the future. One guideline is the best practice knowledge base. One is a guideline for the development of upscaling plans. And one guideline reflects upon the measuring, reporting, and verification of forest restoration, so the MRV. I will briefly show you the best practice knowledge base guideline. Here you have different topics that are relevant for forest restoration, but also for management. And you could learn about, for instance, habitats, about the soil, how you can prepare the soil, but also how to mitigate risks and prevent disturbances. So this is the best practice knowledge best practice knowledge base, and the guidelines in general. You can have a look at all of them. And then the resources. In total, we have 210 resources online now, and you can imagine it was a lot of work. We have different types of resources. We have stories that are articles, in many cases also in a storytelling type, but also some other materials. Then we have publication. They are mostly scientific publications, but also some more practical publications. Then we have good practices from our demo sites, and for the good practices we work together with the FAO, who they have a huge good practice database, and we collaborate with them so that our good practices are also displayed at their page. Tools and methods, educational material, and then also external platforms that we recommend or that have been recommended to us, and this will of course grow. Then, as you can see, the topics we've designed this very differentiated taxonomy. It was a lot of effort that we put into this. And then you can also search via topic. You can search via stakeholder, and you can search via purpose. So also here, very differentiated set of purposes. And there, of course, you can imagine the tagging in the back end of that is done by the authors is, of course, something that needs to be carefully considered. And then you can also look into biogeographic regions, and you can even search via country. So these are the resources, and also in the case of the resources, you can activate the translation. We are really trying to prepare those resources in a way that provide an overview, so that you have an impression what the content is going to be about, in a also user-friendly language. So that's something we are really aware of, that this is very important, that we try to not use so much, that we try to explain jargon, etc., because we are aware not all our users are scientists. Actually, most of them are practitioners, so they need a language that is also appealing to them. And we from communications, of course, also make a big effort in supporting here. And then finally, we have, in case all of that looks nice to you, but you want to have it even faster and more synthesized, you can see here our AI bot, our nice frog. which is going to be bigger in the future. We're currently working on that to display it bigger on the page. You can find it on every sub-page as well. I will click on it, and then you can see it's the Forest Assistant, our Frogbot, and you can ask it questions. And I'm going to make an example. What are nature credits? And then it will analyze the material that is available on the gateway, and only on the gateway. So not from other platforms, but only from the gateway. So this way, the answer that is provided to you there is really based on the curated knowledge and not on something that is out there where you cannot be sure about the quality. And there you can see you have a pretty straightforward answer, 3 paragraphs. Nature credits are a form of payment for ecosystem services, which are financial incentives designed to reward landowners, communities, or countries for managing their land to provide ecosystem services, etc. So you can ask it a lot of questions, and then you can also look for the related material. So that is also important, that you can also look for specific material through the Forest Assistant. And now I will stop my presentation and see if there are questions in the Q&A, and also ask my fellow colleagues if I have forgotten to present anything. Okay, there are no questions in the Q&A. Anything additional from anyone?
Maybe to
Perfect.
say that in the future, we will also have this interface where you can suggest a resource. This is still under development, but we are very much aware that there's even much more knowledge out there, and we would be very happy to also welcome resources provided by you on this gateway. So this is to come very soon, but there is already an email address that you can use to get into contact with us very easily, and also make a suggestion on what could be added to enrich the gateway.
Yes, as you can see below here, forestknowledge@efi.int. There you can reach out to us. And then also, because that's a really important question, the maintenance and further development of the gateway, now that support is ending, we as EFI have taken the responsibility to continue with the gateway, and we have a fellow project, Transform It, which is about integrative forest management, both from a practical and scientific side. And this project is going on for another 2 years, so it will be hosted by Transform It in the future. And then we are also working with different partners on, of course, making the gateway exist longer, being able to further develop and maintain it, and also making sure that the content that is provided there has really the quality that we expect it to have, to make it a valuable resource for you. So I could see there were some clapping hands and appreciation. Thank you very much for that. That really helps us to feel encouraged to continue working on this. And I will stop sharing my screen now and introduce our next speaker, which is Jędrzej Damski from the Polish State Forest. And he is going to introduce us to EUSTAFOR restoration case study.
Yes,
Jędrzej,
thank you very
you
much.
have the floor.
Thank you, Gesche. Let me share the screen and we can start right away. Hope you can see the screen now.
Yes, we can. It's not yet in presentation mode.
Yes, it is. Should be now. Yeah.
Yes, looks like it. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, as it was said, I am presenting today on behalf of EUSTAFOR. However, I will do it from the perspective of Polish state forests. And to start with, let me present some basic information on our organization, as we are the largest and the oldest member of the EUSTAFOR network. To present you the scale of our operation, it's important to say that we manage around 25% of the country, which corresponds to around 80% of Poland's forest. So quite a lot. We are dominating the ownership structure. And last but not least, our organization is based on the principles of sustainable forest management. This is our core, the core of our operations, and this is what we follow. And I hope to present it to you during the presentation of the case study of the post-disaster the response in the state forests and the lessons that we learned out of it. So that's for starters. Let's move to the main dish. Sorry for bringing this reference during the lunchtime, but I'm pretty sure we can all sustain a little bit longer. So the case I wanted to present is from 2017, and it was the largest, the most severe storm our organization experienced throughout its history. The scale was enormous, and it was assessed as the 80,000 hectares destroyed by the devastating wind that occurred overnight in 12th of August. To show you the other aspect of the scale, 10 million cubic meters was destroyed and extracted from the area. To show you the comparison, annual harvest in Poland is around 35 to 38 million cubic meters. So that was huge. Here is the map presenting the forest district affected during the event. So you can see that the quite big part of the country was hit, starting from Poznań and moving up north towards the Baltic Sea and devastating everything on its way. So yeah, that's the scale. So after it happened, it caused immediate response from our side, and it required very fast mobilization of the resources. So within within days, we together with other services like firefighters and local communities, we focused on of course on the most crucial aspects, bringing the access to the areas, unblocking the roads, bringing back the electricity to the local communities, and so on. That was done within the first days after the disaster. After that, within weeks, the whole plan, the whole assessment of the disturbance was done, and within months, we started to extract the wood from the area, and of course, at the same time, start to plan. And that all of that allowed us to regenerate the entire area within 5 years after the event happened. So we didn't need an extra time given to us by the Forestry Act, like the national law for the regeneration after the regular management practices, after regular final fellings. So this shows the good pace and good coordination. So why it was all possible to accomplish? In my opinion, it's a combination of the factors that we already had, like the whole system present already in the area allowed us to mobilize forestry services very quickly, as we have many contractors working in our forests. We also have very good resources if it comes to the production of seedlings, as the state forests manage all the majority of the production of seeds and seedlings in the country. We have strong forest industry that was able to consume the surplus of the wood provided to the market, and of course all the association services like transport or wood sales, and you name it. So this whole system, the synergy, allowed us to develop the living system and respond to such huge disaster in an effective way. Going back to the field, after the regeneration, after the cleanup was done, the whole process of the regeneration started. We used combined methods of artificial and natural regeneration. We identified areas suitable for introducing broadleaves, like oak, birch, larch, and many other mixtures. And because the overall goal at the end of the whole process was to recreate the forest that will become more resilient in the future, more diverse, and maybe, of course, the strength of the wind was so big that I mean, there is no forest that could survive that, but of course, we can adapt better for the events like that, and maybe reduce the damages at the end if anything like that happens again. Of course, the pace that I am mentioning all the time was also important for us, as it was crucial for us to focus on the retention of the soil and water. And the bringing back the vegetation to the area was a crucial thing to minimize the destructive effect on the area after the damage was done. Yeah, the area itself has become a unique living lab, or demo sites, as you had in the SUPERB project. For us, we cooperated with universities and the Polish Research Institutes. We continue to do that. However, I think it's worth to mention that there is still possibility to enhance the cooperation. And we are looking for, of course, new perspective and observations, or can share the results that we already have. Of course, I am presenting this from the practical perspective, but yeah, there is a room for the improvement also in the room for cooperation in the scientific approach. Yeah, so about the practices, what was the yeah, of course it was very severe, and it was devastating, but on the other hand, it was a great opportunity for us to learn from nature, and to think about the practices that we have in the field, and maybe start to test different solutions on the ground, and observe the nature, how it regenerates after the storm. And what we learned was all the area affected was very mixed, and of course there was a huge area in many places that the storm created, the open and clear areas with no trees at all, but it also left fragments with partially damaged stands, seed trees, and those mixed structures. And after we assessed everything, we learned that the regeneration of such area requires, of course, the mixed approach. And in general, the regeneration in such situations require different silvicultural approaches in general. So for those open areas, of course, we had to use the artificial regeneration seedlings provided by our nurseries, but those partially damaged areas were good for the natural regeneration from the seed trees left in the area. So that was something that was used as well. What we also learned was that the introduction of the broadleaf tree species is not always the good case, at least not immediately, as there are many conditions from the limiting the possibility of the introduction of those species. So we also had to use different methods, like using the birch as a fast growing and light demanding species to create some shelter for the later introduction of other species. But this is the long process, and immediate effect is not possible to be feasible. So all that lessons, I mean, these two examples are not the only ones, but all the lessons from the post-disaster management led us to the reflection that we need to also think about the improvement of our current practices. So we moved to in the areas like that that you see on the picture in the background. This is actually 1 kilometer from the place where the severe clear area was created. And this is the regular management that the picture was done 2 weeks ago. So you see that there is the move away from the clear cuts, and there are seed trees left for the natural regeneration, but natural regeneration is already there under the canopy. And this approach is now being introduced in many pine forest districts in Poland. And the experiences we have on the ground help us to develop such practices. So another picture, a fresh picture, what we have today is a young, diverse stand with many species. Of course, pine is the most dominating one, as the area is the habitats are quite weak. However, we introduced as many of species as we could do in order to create diverse and resilient stands. Of course, all of that was supported by the careful identification of habitats, and we follow the natural patterns and try to recreate the natural species compositions that should be introduced in such areas. To start to sum up everything, I hope that the case that I am presenting here today is an example for all of us. And this demonstrates how the concept of sustainable forest management is an alive concept, and it works in practice, especially under such huge stress, large-scale disturbances. It also shows the value of strong public state forestry systems, and showing that we are capable of, first of all, reacting very quickly, also to coordinate well under such large disturbances, and integrate the whole all the services, like the vast spectrum of ecosystem services into the regeneration process, to create resilient and diverse stands in the future. To sum up, I think when I was looking for the insights for this presentation, talking to the field foresters from the affected area, I remembered one quote for a field forester that he is saying that he was certain that these severe storms will come back. Of course, we all know that, but it is not how. In his perspective was after this whole process of regeneration was that it is not how well we are prepared. Was how well we are prepared when it occurs, and what do we choose when they return. So this whole thing must be a living system, and actually the whole regeneration process and building the resilience process must be at place before it happens. And I am hoping that the presentation I showed to you is one example. Of course, we invite everyone to visit the forest and see how well it grows after the disturbance. And yeah, that would be all from my side. Thank you very much for listening. And of course, if there are some questions, looking forward to listen.
Thank you very much, Jędrzej. There are two questions in the Q&A. One is from Roland Dahm from Germany, from the North Rhine-Westphalian Ministry, and the question relates to the seedlings for reforestation. And he's surprised that you got the seedlings for the reforestation so quickly, particularly the seedlings from the deciduous trees. Because he says that nurseries are actually, in general, not prepared for such events.
Yes, I know that there is a problem with seedlings. In Germany, I know the case of the post-regeneration after the bark beetle. That was problematic for the nurseries. As I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, we were lucky to have to manage the seedlings production on our own, as we are the owners of the Polish State Forest is the owner of most of the nurseries producing the forest seedlings. We also have the control of the seed material in place, and everything was able to adapt quickly. There were some serious investments done before this happened to install such system. So we are lucky to have that, and it's as I said, this is a part of the living system, so we have to be prepared for such thing.
Thank you very much. I think can also serve as an inspiration for other countries to make sure that there's more seedlings available to be better prepared. There's another question from my colleague from European Forest Institute, from Markus Lindner, and he's referring to your statement that you want to move away from large clear cuts. However, after the storm, did you first get more clear cuts? And did you understand it correctly that you actually aim for no clear cuts anymore in the future, and that it wasn't possible in that particular situation?
My point in moving away from the clear cuts was that we try to limit the amount in the regular management after the storm happened, and we use the practices that we used during the regeneration of those partially damaged areas, with now leaving to create some sort of retention based for management practices. However, of course, we were not able to move away from the large clear cuts after the large clear cut appeared in the area. However, that was the good, let's say, playground for us to learn to see how to deal with the natural regeneration of pine, which was considered to be difficult to obtain, but it turns out it is not, and the results actually exceeded the expectations in that case.
Thank you very much. And I think what your presentation stated was that the collaboration between also the different parts of the value chain is quite important. So to have the collaboration with the forest nurseries, with the forest managers, but then also with the value chain to be able to also get the wood out of the forest and sell it properly, and all of this, that this all plays together, and that it's a lot about awareness and resilience at different stages, actually. And then, of course, focusing on the prevention, which you mentioned, is something that you, to increase the resilience, something that you're focusing on right now, also with the different mixture of the species in the forest, etc.
That's true.
Great. Okay. Then that was a good summary. Happy to hear that. There are no further questions in the Q&A so far. I also wanted to, well, thank you very much, Jędrzej, for the presentation. Just to mention that it was a EUSTAFOR case study. EUSTAFOR is our advisory board member. They have supported us throughout the entire project with their guidance and feedback. And it was not a superb case study, but it could very well have been one. So thank you for this inspiration from EUSTAFOR and from Poland. And now we are heading towards the kind of final discussion, feedback, etc., and closing. And I still have a comment from Clémence. She preferred me to read it. So the comment is a response to Gert-Jan, and it kind of also links to several of the things that have been said today. Clémence Dirac, just to let her know, she's from the Ministry of Forests in Switzerland, and she is writing that yes, it is worrying, and in Switzerland they support and already begin with the adaptation of forests to climate change. Politicians are aware of this and are releasing additional funds to ensure the adaptation of forests. Link to the presentation from Sophus and Sven. The funding is really crucial. And also to guarantee in the long term the various ecosystem services forests provide. As for species diversity in the timber industry, the latter will have to adapt to a new diversity of species within 50 to 60 years. In Switzerland, the timber industry is aware of this, but the pressure is not yet really there, so they are not feeling the pressure yet. So she also adds that it must be said that currently and for the next 60 years or so on, with the adaptation of forests to climate change, there will still be enough spruce trees to harvest in Swiss forests, as some spruce stands in the lowlands will have to be converted to other stands that are better suited to the future local climate conditions. So she's, of course, also hoping, as all of us, that the natural disasters will not be too frequent. So to summarize, forest adaptation is essential and must happen in order to maintain forest ecosystems in the long term. So it must happen now. And the timber industry must begin to adapt so it can use the diversity of tree species that will be available then in 60 years. Thank you very much, Clémence. I'm sure that Gert-Jan will be really happy to hear this feedback. There is a question or a comment from Sven. Please, Sven, this is a discussion, so you're just invited to step in.
No, I just wanted to say hello to Clémence and react to her comment. I think it's a great perspective, and it's also good to know that there is an awareness about that it's necessary to mobilize additional public funds, for some of these adaptation challenges. Of course, her comments is also focused very much on the timber benefits, and those are of course by nature private benefits. The other side of it is the ecosystem services and the externalities generated for the rest of society. But I think it does also raise the questions we are looking at. We're looking for private sector contributions to those externalities from outside, but of course, there's also the question of raising awareness with the forest industry itself, and that it's rational to some extent to look forwards and make the necessary investments to safeguard future profits by front running some of these adaptation processes. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sven, for the additional comment. There is still a question from Julia, actually.
Yes,
so this is your time.
Yeah, no, I would like to also thank Jędrzej for his presentation. And I was wondering, of course, considering our profile, what were the relations with the communities living around the forest in the process that you described? And like what changed perhaps also after this process and the relations in the way that the communities were involved? And perhaps any other stakeholders as well, who you haven't mentioned already.
Yeah, so if it comes to the relation with communities, the first contact we had with communities, it was after it happened, actually, because people were stuck in their houses. All the roads were blocked, and a lot of rural communities were in need, and there was a constant contact with those people in order to help them to survive this disaster, and that was the first one. And later on, during the cleanup and the regeneration, there was a constant cooperation with those rural communities, and that's a huge part of maybe this part of the society is not that vocal. However, they supported, I think, all the regenerations. Also, like, those rural areas are very dependent on the forest, so overnight they lost all the connection to the forest. A lot of them worked there or near to it, and that was a disaster also in that case. So I think the rural communities always understand what is happening around the restoration, and that's they are supporting such interventions. If it comes to the authorities, also this is also due to the scale of our organization, we stay in touch with the authorities and we coordinate our actions always. Of course, we are the centralized organization. However, locally, forest districts cooperate with authorities, and this is the link to the societies we constantly have in the forest. So it's not like we do whatever we want. We consult. We always share the information. But lastly, if it comes to those, the public relations stuff. It is also is in place. We organized public community planting. There is also a very interesting case where we, for example, created the national emblem like that. That is the eagle, white-tailed eagle. We created, regenerating one piece of land. We created the picture of the eagle that you can now spot from space. Although it was also done by the volunteers participating in community planting. So that's there is always a connection. And we try to maintain. Of course, it's not always, the cooperation is not always perfect. There are different ideas around the regeneration. Some I don't know, NGOs suggest that we should maybe leave more for the nature to regenerate itself. However, there is always room for the discussion in our company, and so we try to work on that to make it better. However, my point is that the cooperation is always there, and we are open for the suggestions and are willing to discuss. And but at the end, we are responsible for the area, and we do everything according to the principles that we believe in, that is a sustainable forest management, and the result can be now observed. And I think it's something that we should be proud of.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you very much, Jędrzej. And that was, I think, a really nice also interaction follow-up from this group here. There are no more questions in the Q&A. So I would like to give the final words to our really supportive advisory board members. And I will start with Elaine Koch from CPF, from the Confederation of Private Forest Owners in Europe. And then we will also have Piotr Borkowski from EUSTAFOR. Elaine.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the very, very interesting morning. Not all of it was new, as I had the pleasure to follow you through for a long time over all of those years. But it's a very nice wrap up, and can't wait to also see where transform it and the rest will take us. In final word, and really something that I would like to share and highlight, something that we really appreciated about the Superb project is, despite the fact that it's a huge project, it's close to a monster project, you managed to streamline and go to the pond, having this demo area and allow for all of those diversity of socio-economic context, of ecological context, and so on, to really thrive and be included. And this is really something that we saw and we appreciated. And throughout of the more policy development of the nature restoration law, it's something that we always say that we would have preferred a more Superb light approach to restoration, really having the big picture in view. And in link to this, so also something that I would like to, for me, it's one of the highlights of the project, is this fresh community approach, because you included us, stakeholder, more practitioner side, policy making, but also more economist side of the discussion, communication. There is also all of the work that you have done with having leaflet and reaching out to the general public. And so really playing on all of those aspects. And it's really something that from CPF we have appreciated following. And we're looking to see where it's next. You don't see it there, but I do have my knowledge cap just next with me. So you're with me every day when I'm working from home. And yeah, so that would be a few words, but very positive, and looking forward to where's the next path, when we will meet together again, and hopefully that mostly the marketplace and the forest knowledge gateway that will be able to thrive and develop in the future. And I can't wait to use the little frog. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elaine. I got some very excited feedback for the frog, so that's definitely something that was a good idea to implement. And yeah, if you wear the cap, please make sure to send us a picture. Piotr.
Yes, Gesche, thank you very much. And then actually good afternoon to everyone, since this is the first time I have the chance to speak. Indeed, also Jędrzej made actually most of our job already by his presentation. Nothing to repeat, but then at least from EUSTAFOR office, which is based in Brussels, we also would like to thank you for great cooperation within this project. We made, I believe, a lot of learning, exchanging, but also friendship over the topics. So this is really of great value, especially that the project was funded by the taxpayers' money. What I also like that today's webinar gathered a lot of participants from very diverse groups. So then I could see, for example, colleagues from European Commission, DG Envy, or from member states, also from our members, other stakeholders, private owners, which brings the community together to discuss really points of importance. Maybe by quickly referring to what Elisabeth said at the beginning, when it comes to how to understand the restoration needs, how diverse the topic is, but also how many examples were provided and different approaches and points of view throughout the subsequent presentation, we also have to understand the big diversity of situations across Europe. Europe maybe is not the biggest continent, but it's really densely populated with quite fragmented landscapes, which has an impact also on our nature, our land uses, and then when it comes to restoration or regeneration, also the approaches are different. And that was very well illustrated. From our point of view as state forestry, this is also important what we could learn about these different ownership patterns, which have also certain consequences, and this is also having impact on this consultation with stakeholders. And of course, societies today in Europe are being more and more aware and active and trying to also come to the really technical fields like forestry, forest management. At the same time, also we have the huge development of social media, different communication channels. So that's why we also have to face the challenge of approaching to people and to reply to their needs. And then I believe that this project also shows how to do this. From State Forest, we did what we could in the best way with our resources. Of course, EUSTAFOR has 39 members. Polish State Forests are only one of them. But then as much as our contributions can be used also in the future or in supporting the platform for the gateway, the marketplace, we will be happy to respond positively as much as we can. So with this, thank you to all of you for great cooperation and looking to the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Piotr. Then it's my responsibility to wrap this up now. Thank you very much for your presentations, for an excellent timekeeping, which is, I know, very, very difficult, but we managed well. Thank you very much to those who have participated, who have added questions in the Q&A. Please follow up with the gateway. Please think about potential content that could be added there. Please share your projects on the marketplace, and please follow up with our researchers individually if you have specific questions targeted to them. In the name also of superb coordination team, in the name of Elisabeth and all my colleagues, we thank you very much for your support and all the hearts and clapping hands you've shared with us today. And now I wish you a wonderful lunch break. And as already said, we will provide all the videos on YouTube, so you can also share them afterwards with your colleagues. Thank you very much. And I'm also looking forward to some technical breaks now. Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.